Welcome to Putting Language to Work. Bienvenue à Le Langage au service de l'emploi. Commençons cette conférence. Let's get this conference started. My name is Nicholas Salter. I'm the Executive Director of the Provincial Employment Roundtable. Je m'appelle Nicolas Salter, je suis le Directeur Général de la Table Ronde Provinciale sur l'Emploi. It's my pleasure to guide you through what today and tomorrow will look like. Mais d'abord, pour nos participants francophones, je souhaite vous fournir des informations sur les modalités d'accès à la traduction simultanée. Une traduction serait disponible de l'anglais au français. Si vous utilisez un ordinateur, vous devriez voir le bouton Interprétation en bas à droite de l'écran. Ceux qui utilisent des applications mobiles doivent cliquer sur les 3 points en bas à droite de leur écran. Si vous faites ça, vous devrez voir l'option de choisir le flux audio français. Vous aurez également la possibilité de couper ou non l'audio original. Ça devrait être aussi simple que ça, mais si vous rencontrez des difficultés pour accéder à la traduction ou si vous avez des questions, veuillez informer notre équipe dans le chat. So before going any further, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement. The Provincial Employment Roundtable is situated on unceded Indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands on which we primarily conduct our work. Teotake, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. As a provincial organization, however, we represent and work with communities and organizations across the territory of Quebec, equally situated on Inuit and First Nations territory. We would also like to address the ways in which both research and policy, two cornerstones of PERT's mandate, have historically and currently failed or contributed to the oppression and harm of Inuit and First Nations in Quebec. And we aim to develop, in solidarity with Indigenous people, work that centers the importance of representation, equitable research and policy, and particularly the values of linguistic diversity and revitalization. Now, I'd like to tell you a bit about the Provincial Employment Roundtable. We have some actually great speakers discussing some interesting topics today and tomorrow. So before I go into an overview of the conference and provide you some other context and background that went into putting this event together, I wanted to mention also our hashtag. If you want to tweet about the conference, you can use the hashtag Putting Language to Work, ou en français, le langage au service de l'emploi. I also would like to introduce you to a key partner of ours, the SRQEA. For those who don't know, the SRQEA is the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. The SRQEA has been such an important partner in helping to fund and incubate PERT as a project, but also back in 2020, supporting the transition and incorporation process that led to our creation as an independent, multi-stakeholder nonprofit focused on addressing the employment and employability challenges facing Quebec's English-speaking community. Over the last few years, we've continued working with the SRQEA on a number of projects and initiatives. We are excited about their new move to the Ministry of Finance. So for those who weren't aware, the newly formed cabinet, the SRQEA is now being overseen by Minister Éric Girard, who is now both the Minister of Finance, but also the Minister responsible for relations with English-speaking Quebecers. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the first speaker of our event, Mr. Flock. Mr. Flock is the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. As I mentioned, that's now situated in the Ministère des Finances. In November of 2017, William Flock was appointed as the first Secrétaire adjoint, Assistant Secretary in the Ministère du Conseil Exécutif, and tasked with the responsibility of establishing the Secretariat. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Flock worked in the areas of research and policy development for the Department of Canadian Heritage beginning in the early 1990s. And before embarking on his career in government, Mr. Flock worked as a teacher and principal in the English language school system in Quebec, and also worked in the community sector for the Townshippers Association in the Eastern Townships. So Mr. Flock, over to you. But just a little reminder that there are live translators and they appreciate when we speak slowly. That's something I myself struggle with, but I'd ask you to also be reflective of that as well. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Merci. I'd like to just maybe do two things in my little introductory comments here today. Maybe just look back a little bit, because as it happens, we're kind of coming up on a couple of anniversaries that I think are worth noting. One is, as Nick pointed out, the Secretariat was created in the fall of 2017. So in fact, right around this time, almost exactly 5 years ago. I'd also like to, I guess, in terms of the chronology of events, note that the founding conference of PERT was also in November of 2020, so just a couple of years ago. But another event that happened right at this time of the year, just after the creation of the Secretariat, I had the pleasure of being invited to an event being organized by Youth Employment Services, which was looking at young English-speaking Quebecers and the barriers that they face to employment. And at that conference, there were a number of practitioners, there were community organizations and academics. And one of the things that really came clear to all participants, and to us in particular, was that in survey data that was released that day, undertaken on behalf of Youth Employment Services by the Association of Canadian Studies, it was noted that the perceived one of the most important, perhaps the most important barrier to employment for English-speaking Quebecers was their language competency, their French language skills. So that made an impact on us as the Secretariat got rolling and came into being. We undertook a number of consultations and interactions with organizations, and that message was reinforced on many, many occasions. So I think that the topic for this conference very much builds on the kinds of interventions and perceptions that were shared at previous events. And I think that it's really salutary that we do have this focus. The other point I'd like to make is that in follow-up conversations with Iris Unger, who at that time was the Executive Director of Youth Employment Services, she and others echoed this perspective, felt that there was a lack of a policy dialogue between the English-speaking community and its organizations and the government of Quebec. The feeling was that their particular situation was not well understood, and that they had trouble having an impact on policy and having access to programs. So out of that conversation and reflection came the notion that a new organization could be considered. And in fact, those conversations led to the recognition of that need and funding for Youth Employment Services to play the role of an incubator, and eventually to the creation of PERT, which then led on to the hiring of Nick Salter and his very capable team at PERT. But I think if we take stock and look back, we can certainly feel that the English-speaking community is better equipped now to represent its situation and have its needs understood and known by government. And from a government point of view, we do have that advantage now that we have this policy dialogue in place. I guess another important milestone was in November of 2019, and that was the date for the founding conference of PERT. The Minister of Travail, Emploi et de Sécurité Sociale announced the government's intention to create a consultative committee for English-speaking Quebecers in the Commission départementale de marché du travail, which has come to pass. So I think we have PERT on the one hand, we have the committee called STIF on the other, and we now have a platform for policy dialogue between the English-speaking communities and the government of Quebec. And I think those are very important steps forward. I guess the other thing I'd maybe like to focus on a little bit is French language competencies, French as a second language, and French as a language of work. I know that there are certainly controversies and not universal appeal in some of the decisions the government's made around language legislation, but I think it's fairly clear that the commitment within Bill 96 to encourage and recognize the right of all residents of Quebec, whether they're immigrants or Quebec-born or arrivals from other Canadian provinces, to have access to appropriate French second language training is an important policy moment for English-speaking Quebecers. And so I think from that point of view, there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes. This conference is obviously very important in informing government of the situation and the perceptions and the realities and so on. But I can tell you that we're working in close collaboration within the government with the Ministère de la Langue Française, with the Ministère de l'Éducation, with Emploi Québec, with the Ministère de l'Enseignement Supérieur, to try to have the most coherent and effective set of policies and programs that will facilitate that access to language learning, French second language. And I think in that regard, it's useful to look ahead. And of course, we don't have all of the 2021 census data to understand really the latest situation on the ground. But a few weeks ago, there was data released around interprovincial mobility. And one of the things that was noted there was that for the first time in living memory, for at least 50 years, more English speakers moved into Quebec than left Quebec. That's quite a remarkable reversal of a decades-long trend, which does suggest that Canadians from other provinces are attracted to Quebec, and the economic situation is strong. I'm sure that's part of it, and there are other reasons as well. One, and this is more anecdotal, although we do have some data that illustrates this is something of a trend. We know that Montreal, McGill University, Concordia University are magnets, as well as the French language universities, for English speakers from other parts of Canada who are attracted by the idea of coming and studying in Montreal, living in Montreal. But what anecdotally we've heard in dealing with the consortium of post-secondary institutions and with the institutions themselves is that often young people arrive thinking, oh, I'm going to dive in and embrace Montreal as a cosmopolitan city, really encounter the French fact in Quebec, and it's going to be wonderful. But then they get wrapped up in their studies, they get wrapped up in the bubble of the campus of the university life, and before you know it, they're on the point of graduating and realizing that they didn't acquire the French language skills that they might have hoped for. And then when they consider their education prospects, they realize or their employment prospects, they perhaps have the feeling that maybe all doors are not open for them in Quebec. And that gap in sort of expectation and then the lived reality is something that I think we should pay some attention to. One of the things is we've dug a little bit deeper into the interprovincial migration data, and it's very striking how many of the sort of the net gain, if you like, of people moving into Quebec and out of Quebec are in that young cohort, in the 20 to 24 age group in particular, and even in the 25 to 29 age group. So there are young English speakers from other provinces who are moving to Quebec, living in Quebec. As of the census of 2021, we show them living in Quebec, and they've arrived from another province within the last 5 years. We don't yet have the data to show their language skills and so on, but it strikes us that this is really a useful field to look to explore deeper, and I think we'll encourage PERT as part of its research agenda to take up some of those questions. The other thing is, for this, we were only able to see the data for 2016, but the level of French language knowledge among English speakers, the census question obviously is a very low level question. Just, can you carry on a conversation in this language and that language and so on? But we do see that for folks who are 15 years and older in the English speaking community, 2/3 of them in 2016 said that they could carry on a conversation. When we look at in French, when we look at those who are in the workforce, so not studying or not out of the labor force, we find there that, in fact, 1/3 of English-speaking Quebecers are working in French. So obviously that's an important number. It's over 200,000 people. But when we look across the regions, we see some really important variations that for example, when we look at English speakers who work in French, in a number of regions, Chaudière-Appalaches, Mauricie, Bas-Saint-Laurent, Capitale-Nationale, Lanaudière, it's more than 50% who, and it's Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean would be the other one. So in those 6 or 7 administrative regions, English speakers are more likely to work in French than they are in English. That's one observation. But at the other end of the spectrum, in Northern Quebec, in Outaouais, Côte-Nord, they're much less likely to be working in French. Now, there are reasons for it, like many folks in Outaouais cross the border, work in Ontario. Northern Quebec is a particular situation with strong presence of First Nations peoples. And then, of course, Côte-Nord, we have a number of isolated English-speaking villages on the Lower North Shore, which explains perhaps, that lived reality. But I think that it's important to note that region matters, that not the lived reality across Quebec will vary from region to region, both in terms of language capacity and in terms of actual languages used at work. We're also able to look across industrial sectors, and we can see some differences there. I don't have time to go into them today, but I think those are all worthy questions. And as we as a Secretariat, with our partners, PERT and others, Youth Employment Services, Regional Development Network, as we interact with our network of government partners, we're trying to make sure that the best possible information is brought to the table so that we can make the best policy decisions and then roll out the appropriate kind of programming. At any rate, I'm very encouraged by the enthusiastic response to PERT's invitation to this event. And like all of my colleagues at the Secretariat and in other government departments, I'm looking forward to these proceedings. I want to learn about your perspective on these situations, and then we'll try to do the best we can to make sure that that the appropriate policies and programs are developed. So thank you, Nick, and have a great conference, everybody.
Thanks very much for that, Mr. Flock. So I want to take the next few minutes to give you an overview of what's to come later today and tomorrow. But before doing that, I want to give you a bit of background and context as to why we put this conference together. Now, it may be unsurprising to some in the audience, but the first piece of context I want to highlight goes against the myth of English-speaking Quebecers as this wealthy, homogeneous elite. That myth is still pervasive enough, and it crops up from time to time. So I think it's worth repeating. Once considered to be a homogeneous elite, Quebec's English-speaking community has undergone considerable changes over the past 4 decades. Today, Quebec's English-speaking population consists of actually a heterogeneous group of communities. These groups are also in the midst of considerable demographic and economic change, including an aging population and high levels of youth unemployment. Quebec's English-speaking communities are also incredibly diverse. So they are the most ethno-culturally diverse official language minority community in Canada. For example, 1/4 of Quebec's English-speaking population belongs to a visible minority, the majority of whom are Black or South Asian. Along with these changes, English-speaking communities are coping with varying degrees of employment-related issues. Our recent research shows that English speakers in Quebec face a 2% higher unemployment rate than French speakers, and also earn median incomes of about $2,800 less than French speakers. Those figures are from across the province. So there are actually regions in Quebec where English speakers earn at least $4,000 less than French speakers. There are also regions in Quebec where the unemployment rate for English speakers is north of 20%. Now, you might be asking yourself, what do all these figures mean? Unfortunately, they indicate issues with labor market fit, and at the very least, English speakers face a skill gap in Quebec's labor market. Now, normally skills training and employment services should help overcome this skills gap. In fact, the Quebec government has done a commendable job of identifying lifelong learning, employment services, and skills training programs as key to facing our current and future challenges in Quebec. Those include pandemics, economic crises, climate change, automation, demographic challenges such as aging population and a low birth rate. However, linguistic minorities such as the English-speaking community still face issues when it comes to accessing skills training opportunities, English employment services, and French language learning programs. This is especially true once they have aged out of the standard education system and are in the labor market. And these issues are even more evident in regions outside of Montreal, as our attendees from the regions today know very well, where English speakers represent a smaller percentage of the population. Now, the second piece of context I want to highlight is the labor shortage. Quebec, like many other jurisdictions, is facing a labor shortage. Solving that is an important part of our economic growth, increasing our shared prosperity and closing the wealth gap with Ontario. Just as an example, a study conducted in August this year by the CFIB, so the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, found labor shortages are currently the second biggest issue facing small businesses, just after rising costs for things like energy inputs and insurance. Their research showed that a majority of business owners had to work more hours to make up for these shortages, while 45% said that employees had to work more hours. And the third biggest impact was business having to turn down sales or contracts, and the fourth was contract delays. Based on these survey results concerning disrupted sales and contracts, the CFIB was able to calculate part of losses suffered by Quebec small business owners due to labor shortages over the last year. And the figure they came up with was well over $10.7 billion. Notably, both the construction and professional business services sectors suffered losses in excess of $2 billion. Now, if we think about both these pieces of context together, they combine to offer a fairly obvious win-win situation here, where governments can be making the necessary investments and commitments for employment services in English, language training, and skills training for Quebec's English-speaking community, which at the same time will enable our community to make a full contribution to Quebec's economy via better employment outcomes. Our hope is that the keynote and various panels we have pulled together will provide insights and help point a way forward. So in our first panel today, the panelists will have the opportunity to dive deeper into the employment issues and needs among Quebec's English speakers. We'll hear how employment challenges for English speakers vary by region or by identity. But we'll also hear about how English employment services can connect English speakers with opportunities and the important role community organizations play in developing and implementing innovative solutions. At the end of day tomorrow, skipping ahead now, we'll be talking about education and our Education to Employment in Quebec's English-speaking communities panel. The reason we put this panel together is that despite high levels of educational attainment, English speakers in Quebec continue to face employment challenges as a linguistic group. I'm particularly interested in hearing the panelists discuss vocational and technical training. For those who are not aware, we recently completed our English language vocational and technical training in Quebec report on our website. And I was shocked to learn that English speakers pursue vocational education at about half the rate of French speakers. 6.2% of English speakers in Quebec have a vocational education diploma compared to 13.2% of French speakers. But that panel will explore much more than that. It will look at the relationship between education and employment for Quebec's English speakers, but most importantly, look at how to overcome the existing challenges and barriers. And finally, our keynote speaker and our first two panels tomorrow will look at language learning. As Mr. Flock mentioned, it's a central thrust of our conference. We're going to look at language learning, particularly in the workplace. And if you're asking yourself, why does this topic occupy so much space in our conference? Well, it's because our community has told us it's a priority. Back at the founding conference for PERT in 2019, we heard loud and clear from the English-speaking community that lack of access to French language training was a major problem, and we've taken that seriously. Since that conference, we've conducted an employment survey of English-speaking Quebecers, and in that 2021 report, available also on our website, we found further evidence of this major barrier for English speakers in the workplace. In fact, lack of French language skills was the most common barrier to employment experienced by individual respondents. 67% of respondents indicated they experienced this barrier in the past 3 years. Even more striking, lack of French language skills remained the top barrier among respondents across the gender spectrum, as well as those who identified as visible minorities, students, and those who live in non-urban regions. And so over the last year, we also set out to ask the question, is Quebec a good place to learn French? Our F2L program inventory report, again on our website, gave us that answer. And the answer wasn't nearly good enough. Our report found issues with findability, eligibility, and accessibility. Now, our Learning French for the Workforce panel tomorrow will provide us with more perspective on these challenges, but it also brings together leaders designing and implementing programs that we're pretty excited about. Now, we also looked at professional orders. Why? Well, as I've already mentioned, the province is currently in the midst of a labor shortage, but more specifically, a recent report by MTES, so the Ministère du Travail, de l'Emploi et de la Solidarité Sociale, shows that there are 37,120 vacant positions in the fields of healthcare and social assistance, and that the situation could worsen over the next few years. The same MTES report shows that almost half of the professions that are expected to suffer severe labor shortages, including healthcare and social assistance, are regulated by professional orders, and that these shortages will be felt across 16 of the province's 17 regions. Yet our French language support for Quebec's English-speaking professionals report found that there is a lack of transitional programs that allow professionals to either bridge into their profession or work in their profession while they simultaneously receive the French language training necessary to pass the OQLF French language exam, amongst other issues. I'm really looking forward to our professional orders panel tomorrow, which will unpack these issues, but also look at solutions. Now, despite all the questions around French language learning in Quebec, particularly for the workforce, the passage of Bill 96, which may exacerbate the employment gaps and challenge our community is facing if further solutions aren't developed and deployed. The passage of Bill 96 has also led to the creation of Francisation Quebec. This newly created institution is supposed to solve some of these language training issues, yet we are short on details on the type and scope of programs that will be on offer. And it's for this reason that I'm particularly excited about our keynote speaker. In a number of minutes, we'll have Donna Lewis joining us. Donna is the Deputy Chief Executive of the National Centre for Learning Welsh, and she will share her insights into her work and the progress her team has made there. So although the context in Wales is different, and we recognize that, it's going to be an important opportunity to step out of the Quebec context and do some blue sky thinking about language learning in the workplace. Comparing international best practices and looking at other jurisdictions is just such a great way to benchmark and spur innovation. And we hope that Donna's keynote provides inspiring examples of innovative language learning practices in the workplace. So I'd hope to be able to offer you a little break, but looks like we're just on time here with the 10 o'clock keynote. So we're going to move ahead and hopefully get Donna up on the screen here so I can formally introduce her. Hi, Donna. Nice to see you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Donna Lewis, who has prepared a presentation about her work with Welsh language learning. Just wanted to note that following the presentation, we'll be taking questions from the audience for the remainder of our time. I'd like to remind you to please save your questions until the end of the presentation and to use the Q&A box feature. So you should all be able to see the bottom of your Zoom window, a Q&A box. That's where we'll be taking the questions, not in the chat. So you put them in the chat, we won't be able to get to them. And I'll come back online after Donna's presentation, read some of those questions to her. So again, the Q&A box is the way for you to submit questions you may have for Donna throughout her presentation. Feel free to put those questions in there as the presentation goes on. Again, we'll just get to that at the end. If you have any questions about how to do that, how to access the Q&A box, please write to my team in the chat and they'll be happy to answer. Now to introduce Donna. Donna developed her career by working a range of positions for Mudiad Methrin, the largest Welsh medium early years care and education organization, providing services to 20,000 children annually. In 2013, she was appointed Deputy Chief Executive for the organization and was the acting Chief Executive before leaving in 2016 to join the National Centre for Learning Welsh. She is Deputy Chief Executive of the National Centre for Learning Welsh and leads the Planning and Development Directorate, responsible for corporate quality, finance, and innovative schemes such as Work Welsh, and the new scheme providing learning Welsh opportunities for 16 to 25-year-olds. Donna has led the sector's digital transformation, which began with the development of a multimedia digital platform to give learners greater support and choices. Donna has been a council member for Adult Learning Wales since 2020, also serving on their resources committee. And Donna, just before we get started, just a little reminder again that there are live translators. So if you keep that in mind and try not to speak too quickly, it'd be great. I'm sure they would greatly appreciate that. So Donna, over to you.
Merci, diolch yn fawr, Nick. I'm going to share my screen first of all. So let's just try and get this up on the screen. There we go. If somebody can just tell me that you can see the slides, that would be great, fantastic. Felly, diolch yn fawr, Nick. Thank you for the introduction. And in Wales, as we would say, prynhawn da, braf iawn bod gyda chi. Isn't it fantastic that I can visit you today for a session like this, even though I'm actually 3,000 miles away and I don't have to navigate through the snow to get to you. So the advantages of technology is an amazing thing. As Nick mentioned, I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at the National Centre for Learning Welsh. And today I'm going to take you through the story of establishing the National Centre and its Work Welsh project in particular. But before I do that, here are a few facts about us here in Wales to set the context for you. In Wales, we have a population of over 3 million, and during the last census release in 2011, there were 562,000 Welsh speakers. In 1993, the Welsh Language Act was accepted by UK Parliament, and this put the Welsh language on an equal footing with the English language in Wales for the first time ever. In 2003, all political parties signed up to the Iaith Pawb, a national plan to create a bilingual Wales. And in 2010, the Welsh language measure modernised the existing legal framework regarding the use of the Welsh language in the delivery of public services and is now the measure that is in force here in Wales. In 2016, the Welsh Government launched its most ambitious strategy yet, when it announced its intention of creating 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. And that's really when the national story and the National Centre story begins. In 2016, following a review of the national Welsh for Adults sector by the Welsh Government, the National Centre for Learning Welsh was established. We were established as an independent body and a contract was awarded for 7 years. We have responsibility for all aspects of the Learn Welsh for Adults sector. Previously, in Wales, Welsh for Adults was delivered by 6 different centres and around 26 local providers. There was no one national body responsible for the work. Welsh Government recognised that Welsh for Adults had a significant contribution to the aim of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. So that's when it all started for us at the National Centre, and myself and 3 other senior officers were appointed. We are now a team of 20 that work for the National Centre itself, and we have around 650 members of staff who form part of the National Welsh for Adults workforce. One of the first strategic decisions that were made were to streamline the number of providers, and we now have a structure of 11 across Wales. They include universities, further education colleges, and local authorities. They generally provide community-based Learn Welsh lessons to around 13,000 learners every year. This was a significant step forward, which caused some controversy at the time here in Wales, and a lot of our efforts went into managing change and building positive relationships. I'm happy to say that we have had stability in the sector now for 6 years. Providers work well, we have a robust legal contract for delivery and monitor the efforts and outputs very closely, and it's led to an increase in the number of adults learning Welsh. Another significant decision was based around the curriculum. Before the establishment of the centre, there wasn't a national curriculum that the sector followed. In fact, there were numerous different courses being used. For example, there were 12 different entry-level courses in use. A national curriculum was developed and a learning and teaching directorate set up as part of the National Centre. We now follow a national curriculum that sets out the overview of the 4 languages skills: speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and also sets out the functions and grammatical constructions across the levels. Our curriculum is compatible with the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the CEFA, and all learners now follow this curriculum. We have course books and resources, a training academy for tutors, all framed around the national curriculum. Our courses are non-accredited, they're badged, but learners can choose to complete an exam to gain a formal award for their studies. And the transformation continued. In 2016, we established a digital framework. Its aim was to innovate, offer a variety of digital learning opportunities to our learners and discover new ways to help learners to learn digitally. And since then, the digital work of the sector has been transformed, mainly due to our early decision to establish a multi-layered digital platform. It's a bespoke platform created specifically for us and continues to evolve year on year. And through this platform, we have a one-stop shop for learners regarding everything to do with learning Welsh. They can search for a course, register and pay. They can access virtual resources library with over 1,000 digital resources to support their learning. They can access a learning management system, including a My Learning area for each learner where progress can be tracked, additional resources added to help with the learning, and achievements recognised. We also have a course builder that allows us to add to the learning methods offered to learners, including a digital catch-up service if a learner misses a lesson. And this is to name only a few. We do recognise that this early work and transformation has been the sector's saviour during the pandemic, as this work allowed us to change the delivery method overnight from face-to-face to virtual lessons, and the Welsh for Adults service continued seamlessly throughout that difficult period. And here on the screen are a few fast figures for you regarding the digital platform. As I mentioned, we are a one-stop shop for learners, and recently we've also partnered with Duolingo, and we are now responsible for the Welsh language course on Duolingo, which attracts around 500,000 learners. As you see, it's the 6th most popular language in the UK, and we are above the Russian, Chinese and Portuguese language. So it's a huge platform for us to be partnered with Duolingo. Another significant factor was data management. One of the most controversial issues that we picked up on, one of the most challenging issues facing the sector, was the lack of consistent and correct data, which means that there wasn't even a way of knowing how many adults were learning Welsh. It was one of the most concerning factors for the Welsh Government, as the sector was funded completely by public money. After 2 years of setting up systems, training and ensuring data sharing legal framework, we were given an official statistics producer status here in Wales in 2018. Only around 20 of the bodies in Wales have been given this status, and it now means we have robust data, data that can be published, but more importantly, that can be used to strategically plan using sector intelligence. And simply put, we just now understand our audience. Before I move on to the next chapter of our story, which is our Work Welsh project, I can't do that without talking a little about marketing. The sector, for the first time ever, under the leadership of the Comms and Marketing Directorship of the Centre, now has a recognised brand. It has common values and aims, and the successful campaigns led by experts in their fields to attract more and more learners to learn Welsh. And even though it appears basic, this just wasn't something that happened in the past. There were many local efforts, but all under different brands and different messages, all very confusing for the learners. The other important part of our story, of course, is the funding, and all of this can't be done without the support of the Welsh Government. The funding, as you see on the screen, is significant here in Wales, especially for a Welsh language body. And the funding is not without its challenge. In 2021, as a result of the pandemic, we faced a funding cut of over 50% to the Centre's budget and our Work Welsh budget. And I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But the good news is that we are now back to the figures here shown on the screen. So that's a little brief history of setting up the National Centre. We have been party to many reviews since then, and I'm happy to say that all is well. Estyn, our Education and Training Inspectorate, has a rolling programme of reviewing our providers and also the centre itself. And last year, the centre had our review with excellent results. Welsh Government also undertook a rapid review of the centre in 2021. And again, it bore positive views about our work. And with that review came confirmation that the centre would receive a new agreement from Welsh Government, which allows us to plan for the long term so that we can continue to deliver Learn Welsh provision in phase 2 from August 2022. The government saw this second phase as one in which the centre will consolidate, strengthen and develop its role. And that contract has now been given to us for the next 5 years. So I'll move on to the next chapter, and one which I think is of great interest to you, which is our project called Work Welsh. It's one of our most significant projects within the centre. In 2017, the Welsh Government approached us with an opportunity to lead on a new Welsh in the Workplace scheme. We had been discussing this with different political parties, and it was also noted as one of our priorities in our strategic plan. We always knew that there was such an opportunity to develop this, and it hadn't been done on a national basis before. The funding we were offered was part of a political agreement here in Wales between two parties, and we were offered 2.5 million. And a little surprisingly for us, we were asked to present a business case for this in a couple of weeks. And I remember sitting on a train, on a 4-hour train journey, in fact, to a meeting with a blank piece of paper and our chief executive next to me. And that's really where the plan was formed. I think it came quite quickly because we always knew what was required, but we'd never thought about the execution in detail or how that would actually work in reality. Our first priority was to give employers a choice so that the offer became something that was accessible and useful to them as at the National Centre. We do hope to continue to reach new audiences, and we have 2 new exciting projects currently being developed, where we've been given new responsibilities in our phase 2, as the Welsh Government calls it. And we will now be offering Learn Welsh courses free of charge for young people from 16 to 25 years of age. And we also have a Welcome to All project, which sees us adapting our courses for the first time into other languages, such as Pashto, Dari, Arabic, Ukrainian, in order to help asylum seekers and refugees who reach Wales to learn the language and about Wales itself. We will wait with bated breath to see the results of the 2021 census, and obviously we will hope to reach more and more learners and get to the aim of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. So I hope that that's given you an insight into our work. I wish you well on your journey. I can honestly say that it's been a joyful ride, all the ups and downs along the way. We've learned a lot and we've also gained a lot. We really feel that the opportunity to influence employers and learners to use more of the Welsh language has really been worthwhile. Diolch am wrando. Thank you for listening.
All right. Thanks for that, Donna. So I see a few questions are coming into the Q&A box. I'm going to take moderator privilege and ask you a first question, and I'll give folks time to get more questions in the Q&A box. What really struck me when you were speaking was the mention of being on a train ride, right? And coming up with part of the strategy on the train ride. And I think a lot of people who work in kind of policy world understand that sometimes that's how programs gets created, and sometimes that can lead to great innovation. But my question is, backing up a second, if you had the opportunity to do that, and you mentioned funding restrictions as well, right? So that there were some funding issues around the pandemic. But I'm curious, if you had the opportunity to do this all over again, and funding wasn't a concern, and you could kind of bring to bear all the experience you've had through this journey, what would you do differently, or where would you start?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it, Nick? And maybe to have more than 2 weeks to write a business plan would have been good. Quite a short time to write that plan. And to be honest with you, the funding, the 2.5 million was significant. In fact, it was probably too much in that first year. It was too much pressure to create a scheme and to spend, 2.5 million in that first year. Looking back, I think, learning some of the lessons that we did, we tried a few things like mass marketing. We tried, reaching out to employees and different ways of engaging with them. And I have to say that I think that doing, the time again, I would just leave all that be. And I would definitely focus on, that face-to-face engagement. It seems strange. Our marketing person still thinks it's strange here that we're not utilizing the marketing tools that we have to hand. But it was growing that scheme organically by talking about it with employers. It was sometimes a sales pitch used to use your persuasion powers to try and persuade them why this was worthwhile and why they needed it. But we obviously had the government's backing, and that was a great help. We worked closely with the Welsh Language Commissioner here in Wales. We had Welsh language standards, were placed on public services that told them they had to do something about their Welsh language skills as well. All of that helped, I think, to get us to where we got to.
Okay. Well, as you know, employment matters to us at PERT. So I actually wanted to hear from you, Donna, about some of the thinking that went into the decision to focus on the Work Welsh program, and more broadly, why was the workplace an area of focus for your strategy?
Yeah, so as I mentioned right at the very beginning of the presentation, there were some particular measures here in Wales, the legal measures that actually put the Welsh on an equal footing to English, for the first time ever, specifically in public services. And from that, there were also standards that were put on those public services, and they had to do it, that they didn't have a choice in doing it. So really, we came to them with the answers, and I think that made it a much easier process. Okay. They simply had to do it. They didn't know how to do it. So what we did was turn up with some of the answers for them.
Okay, and yeah, I think so. I'm seeing there's some questions from the audience that I think build upon what you just answered here, and I think people are trying to get a better understanding of the context. So you mentioned the requirement, right, in the civil service. So we have one question from Lori Rubinger. I'm going to combine a few questions here because I think they're on the same kind of thematic thrust. Is it a disadvantage to job seekers to not have Welsh as a skill? And another attendee, anonymous one, asks, is Welsh a language requirement for many jobs, or are you trying to preserve the Welsh language? So I think that's where we get at maybe the context being a bit different than here.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a disadvantage. I would say it's an advantage to have the Welsh language as a skill. So public services here in Wales are now required to be bilingual. So, you know, people need that Welsh language skill to be able to deliver services here in Wales, but it's an ongoing process. So there are requirements that, you know, the Welsh Language Commissioner monitors public services that they do deliver on the Welsh language standards. But we are still getting there. I wouldn't say that our process is perfect in any way at all, but it definitely is an advantage to have Welsh language as a skill here in Wales, and people are starting to recognise that. So if you want a job in the civil, in the public sector here in Wales, to have Welsh as a skill is a definite advantage.
Okay. And actually, so with the private sector, and I noticed actually, I don't know if you're aware, our Globe and Mail, so it's, you know, a fairly large national newspaper here in Canada, had an article this week on the Welsh soccer team. Congrats, by the way. Canada is also in the World Cup. But they actually had an article in Welsh in our Globe and Mail newspaper, which is quite interesting. It's available in English too, on the Welsh soccer team success. But can you talk maybe about that partnership and perhaps private employers as well, and how the Welsh language is seen amongst private employers?
Yeah, private employers is a more difficult area, and what we did was to target some of the larger private employers here in Wales. So we have BT, a large telecoms employer. Notoriously, English didn't have, you know, any requirements for the Welsh language, but we went to talk to them. And even though their standards aren't the same for them, they haven't got the same requirements about the Welsh language, there was a real appetite there to increase Welsh language skills within the workforce. Here in Wales, anybody who's lived in Wales and been through the education system has some Welsh language. It's a requirement here in schools to have it either as a second language or a first language education here in Wales. So they wanted to give it to their workforce. They wanted to give that skill to their workforce and also be able to serve the public bilingually. So we did work with some larger private sector companies, but the momentum was slower there, I would say. It was a more difficult place to be. You know, business requirements became the priority before the language requirements. It's different in public service. But with the FAW, the Association of Football here in Wales, we obviously saw that we'd reached the World Cup for the first time. I think it's in 64 years, I think, here in Wales. So there was great interest, and the Football Association of Wales football here in Wales are doing fantastic things in promoting the Welsh language. They're very much a bilingual association, and they're doing fantastic things for the Welsh language. So we set up a meeting with them. I went actually to speak to their chief executive 2 hours. It was quite an intensive meeting, and just to talk through how we could help them really to increase what they've already been doing with the Welsh language. And they just basically took our offer straight away. You know, there was no negotiation there. So we'll now give them a full-time tutor for 12 months. The tutor will work with the Welsh players. They'll work with different teams. And we think that will generate a huge interest. We'll be able to influence young people, for instance, here. If some of those famous Welsh footballers are starting to use Welsh in their TV interviews and so on. So we see it as a great investment, just to draw more attention to the Welsh language.
Okay, and I'm just looking through the questions here as well while you're answering. So we've got quite a few questions coming in, but one of them is about partnerships. So it sounds like, you know, with the Football Association, it went fairly smoothly. But an attendee here asks, was it difficult to form relationships with partners? Or are they really open to your project? So perhaps were there other employers that were less open, or has it been so far pretty good for you?
Oh no, I've given you a positive story, haven't I? But, you know, I could also list some of the failures we've had. You know, we approach a lot of employers, and to be honest with you, you know, we haven't got enough funding here to reach all the employers. So if somebody doesn't take up our offer, we just move on to the next one. But you know, there are more difficult sectors. Health and care is a priority of ours, but it's a notoriously difficult sector. Obviously, there's pressures, and to be able to release any member of staff from health and care is really, really difficult. But we've chipped away, and we're working with 2 health boards out of the 10 health boards here in Wales. We're also engaging a lot with the health and care policymakers in Welsh Government. And we're starting to make inroads there. It's taken many, many years. So yeah, there are definitely more difficult stories that I could give you. And some of the partnerships, some have failed, some haven't succeeded, but we've actually gone back to some of them as well. So I mentioned the telecoms one, and we're actually just restarted the discussions with them after, I think, 3 years in the past. So yeah, it's not always a good kind of positive story. We have to work quite hard to persuade some sectors and some employers to be part of our scheme.
Okay, and actually, one of the things I think we think is incredibly important and the success of French language learning for English speakers, particularly in the workplace, is getting people into the workplace and doing this training kind of on the job as much as possible. So one of the questions actually that from our audience, Lori Rubinger again here, asked about incentives to employer to offer these courses. So I'm wondering what that relationship is with employers. What does the government offer? What is the cost being absorbed by employers? Obviously, in offering this kind of training on the job is complicated and it can be costly. Someone has to bear the cost. So how do you work through those kind of issues?
Yeah, so the funding that we were given by Welsh Government allows us to provide all the training free of charge to employers. So there is no cost to employers at all. Obviously, the cost, the investment for them is to release staff to be able to attend the training. But there are different models out there. Some employers give time in kind. If people attend them, at different times of the day, for instance, they give time in kind. We adapt some of our models to be around the kind of the lunchtime, free time that employees have. And I think that the main answer really lies in those self-study courses. As soon as we started to offer more flexibility for employers, the interest kind of shot up really. We were quite, previously the models were the models, and we could flex a little bit around the delivery of 120 hours. But we understood that employers needed more flexibility, they needed more choices, more delivery methods, and that's why we started to increase our programme the courses that were available. So at the moment we have face-to-face courses, virtual courses, self-study courses, so employers can actually pick and choose what's suitable for them. The only thing we don't offer is reimbursement for releasing staff. And at the beginning, that was a question that we were asked quite often, but now we're asked it much less often, I have to say. I think that people now understand what the scheme is given, from a monetary value point of view, and, the investment from the employer's side is releasing time.
Okay, so there's no compensation for employers for the time of their employees. Is there a specific reason that kind of got blocked, just because of the sheer cost of it, or because, Okay.
Yeah, the 2.5 million would not have gone very far had we to give employers, funding for releasing staff. There is one scheme here in Wales in the education sector for teachers where they are reimbursed, but it's a hugely costly scheme, and it means that the numbers who are being trained are really, really low, and they just would not have got to the numbers we've gotten to if we were doing that.
Okay, so I'm seeing still some more questions around kind of understanding the motivation of employers, and perhaps, obviously our contexts are different. So I'm going to double back there, because if employers aren't being reimbursed, and perhaps Welsh is not necessary as a skill in the workplace, what's the pitch to the employers? Are they there because they like the idea that their employees are becoming bilingual so they can offer bilingual services? I mean, what's the motivation for employers?
Yeah, it's exactly that, Nick. In the public service, there are requirements on them to provide that service bilingually. So, the Welsh language standards here in Wales include many employers in health and care, local authorities, public-facing services, but there are also many employers who aren't part of the Welsh language standards, so it's not a requirement on them. But I have to say that the interest from both categories, I would say are the same. So the motivation really is that here in Wales, we're trying to get to 1 million Welsh speakers. The requirement from the public to have a bilingual service is increasing. and employers are understanding that, and they're recognizing that providing that service is becoming more and more important.
Okay. Well, we've talked a lot about employers and kind of their incentives and how that's worked in the workplace. I wanted to get a bit into kind of the language learning itself, the content delivery. I know there's some questions in that regard. And actually, one of the things that I'm interested in is you mentioned during your presentation, you talked about like digital services and the pandemic, right? And I think a lot of people are thinking about how does learning happen online? A lot of us have gone through kind of pilot projects or experiments and living that perhaps on ones we haven't chosen necessarily. But we also know, there's some huge advantages to delivery online on online platforms. Quebec, as you could probably imagine, has some very core urban centers, but also rural regions. So reaching rural populations or regional populations via the internet is a great idea, but we also know that there's issues of internet access, digital literacy when it comes to online learning. And there's also issues of loneliness or separation, like you don't get that feeling of being in the classroom, being together as part of a cohort. So could you maybe speak a bit about that and how that's worked for you in terms of the approach you've done around digital learning?
Yeah, and all of those issues are here in Wales as well, Nick. We're a very rural country, and there are definitely pockets here in Wales where internet is a huge issue. There's digital poverty here in Wales, so we're facing similar issues to what you've just mentioned. But the pandemic did come, and we had to think all of our classes were face-to-face prior to the pandemic. So you're talking about 13,000 learners going to a place to learn. So we just had a choice, didn't we? We had a choice that we were either going to stop what we were delivering or we were going to change overnight. And there were many discussions, as you can imagine, in the lead up to the lockdown as to how we were going to do this. But because of all the preparation we had done, and we were actually on the foot of, starting to offer self-study courses, blended courses. We were on the foot of all of that anyway, but it took us, I think, about 4 weeks, to kind of rejig everything around, provide a lot of training for our tutors. But within that 4 weeks, every learner was offered virtual classes. And I think that the drop-off was relatively small. I think we were looking at about 3% of learners that we lost during that time. So, it was dramatic, and moving 13,000 learners, 800 tutors to learning online was a huge shift, but we just changed all of our focus to that. And now that we're kind of looking at the new norm, really, I'd say that we're kind of back to about 50-50 here. So 50% have gone back to learning face-to-face in classrooms, and 50% of our learners continue to learn virtually online. So I think that that's the pattern that will carry on into the future. I don't think we will ever go back to the pre-pandemic situation of having everybody learning in a classroom. And I think it served as well. Numbers have increased. Retention of pupils have increased. So there are really positive things that came out of that dire situation, really, for us. But it's changed our delivery method forever.
Great, great to hear. But more specifically, in reaching hard to reach or rural populations, the question from Abby McGugan, has it helped, or have you had to develop additional strategies beyond kind of the digital platforms to ensure you're able to reach rural or hard to reach populations and help them access adult Welsh learning?
No, we haven't really. What we have is a choice now. So, if you're in a rural community and if digital connectivity is a difficulty for you, you will have a choice of attending a face-to-face class. You'll have to travel, but that's always been the case here in Wales. But to be honest with you, I think it's actually made some of our classes more reliable. In the past, if the numbers were low, we had to shut classes and learners had to be shifted around. But then now, if we've got a low number of learners, we can now shift it around virtually, which makes it better to be able to continue with the classes. We've also increased the reach internationally. So we have a lot of international learners, so not only learners here in Wales, we've got learners from the UK and internationally as well. And I think that we've gone from something like 7% international learners to near 15,000 international learners. So there's definitely been an increase in that way as well. But, connectivity and digital poverty is still an issue here in Wales. We can't reach everybody, especially in those rural areas. It can be difficult, but we have more choice. And I think that's the great benefit for learners. They can choose to follow a course, live with a tutor, or they can do it on their own time if connectivity and everything else is a difficulty.
And sorry, and does international learners be learning via your platform or via Duolingo? Because you mentioned the partnership with Duolingo.
No, they're reaching us. Yeah, they're coming to our classes.
Okay.
This morning I was talking to somebody up in North Wales who were delivering their classes there for us, and they were saying that their international learners have gone up to 30%. So,
okay.
there's still the majority are from Wales, which is a great thing for us, but also we're attracting that international audience as well. And, there are many reasons why people want to learn Welsh. They might have families here in Wales and want to engage with them in Welsh. We might have people who want to move back to Wales, studying abroad and what have you. So, we're not excluding anybody from learning Welsh, and we're just, the more people who learn Welsh, the better.
Okay, so there's no test in terms of citizenship or residency around eligibility for the access to I imagine, to the remote learning program. So everyone, the globe is welcome.
Yes, the globe is welcome. Yeah, but we obviously need to ensure that the majority of our learners are from Wales, and we're keeping a close eye on the number. And what we've said is, if we reach over 15%, then we might start to look at things differently. But we're currently kind of hovering around that 15% international learners. But the numbers of our learners have increased, so it can only be a good thing for the Welsh language.
And so you mentioned a partnership with Duolingo. So that's a platform I think that many of us in attendance today are familiar with. Can you speak about more about the role of the partnerships in your strategy and how valuable they have in reaching your goals? So you can speak about the Duolingo partnership specifically, or other partnerships as well.
Yeah, so Duolingo changed their model of delivery about a year and a half ago. I think that previously volunteers used to host some of the language or the kind of the minority language courses on Duolingo, but they needed to move to a more structured position. So Duolingo approached us and asked if we wanted to take over that Welsh language course. We have a legal contract with Duolingo. We're now completely responsible for the content of that Duolingo course. But what it's done for us, obviously, is it's allowed us to align the Duolingo course to our own curriculum, to our own courses. But it's also opened the door to that 500,000 audience that they have. So it's a significant amount of people who are following the Duolingo course. So what we've always aimed for here in Wales is to be a one-stop shop for learners, to have a large family of deliverers, really, of Welsh, and that's what we're starting to do. We have something else called Say Something in Welsh here in Wales as well. It's another app learning delivery method, and that's also become part of our offer. So learners just have a choice. They can pick and choose what suits them, and Duolingo adds to the choice. It's a way of practicing what they're learning and helping to add to the language that they're learning.
Okay, so Susanna Tang, again, this is still a bit in the kind of mechanics of the learning, asks, could you expand on what is included in the content of the confidence building courses?
Yeah, this has been many years in the making, to be honest with you, because traditionally our sector concentrated on learning language from the beginning. So it was from entry all the way up. But here in Wales, as I mentioned, anybody who's been through the education system has some grasp of Welsh, and many people lack the confidence in using Welsh language, especially in the workplace. We have to use it in a more formal manner. So the confidence raising courses, we've got two different models. We've got the residential courses, so they're 5 days. So people from the workplace go to the residential centre for 5 days. They stay there day and night. And as I mentioned, they're immersed in the Welsh language. They have no choice. It's based up in kind of the very high coast area of North Wales, where Welsh is a predominant language anyway. And they're immersed. They attend lessons, but they also, as I was saying, do the more informal things like ordering breakfast and having entertainment at night, for instance. But the focus of the course itself is reinforcing the use of the Welsh that they have. taking down some of the barriers that they're facing as to, my Welsh isn't good enough, I can't pronounce this well enough, people will correct me, kind of getting rid of some of those myths. And with some of the groups I get there, if they come from one sector, so for instance, we have a sports one that's been arranged at the moment, the course will be tailored for their sector. So they'll be learning, words and phrases that's relevant to their work. And that's what we do a lot of in that language centre. The other part of the confidence raising courses that we offer are shorter courses. So they are a set of 10 2-hour courses, so it's a total of 20 hours of learning. And basically, they just get to sit with a tutor, virtually a lot of the time in virtual space. And they just get to sit with a tutor and explore everything that makes them not confident in learning Welsh. And the tutors will work with them if it's just to pronounce a word, pronounce, a way of talking to their audience. We've got significant stories really about, people from the health sector. So a GP, for instance, couldn't have appointments through the medium of Welsh because she didn't think her Welsh was good enough. She didn't have the right vocabulary for medical terms in Welsh. But now, after attending those types of sessions, she's understood really that just conducting the conversation in Welsh, but using some of the medical terms in English is absolutely fine. And that's a better service to give to her client, to her patient, than, not being able to use Welsh at all. So those confidence raising courses are something that will grow, I think, here within our offer. It's kind of a quick win. They already have the Welsh language as a skill. They're just not using it or not confident enough in using it.
Yeah, that is so important. I mean, our youth are increasingly bilingual as and increasingly speak French. I mean, bilingualism has been increasing in the English-speaking community, yet it's still identified by the community as a barrier for employment. And a lot of that has to do with confidence. And so actually, you're right. And I think identifying that as a quick win, right? We have the basic language skills. Perhaps we learned it in school, but we went to an English degree. We're back on the workplace, and the confidence isn't there. Or perhaps the specific vocabulary isn't there, and that's quite inspiring. And actually, that gets me to my next question from André Rousseau. And it's asking, how do you recruit tutors or trainers offering technical training for diverse jobs that require a high level of language skills? And perhaps you're not doing that, but that sector-specific vocabulary. Who is doing the learning, and actually more broadly, I think obviously with the labor shortage in general, recruiting language teachers is in itself an obstacle or a challenge. So if you could maybe speak to sort of the broader kind of recruitment and training, and who is doing the language teaching, and then getting into the specifics on the technical training and technical vocabulary, that would be quite helpful as well.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned in the presentation that we, as a sector, we employ around 650 people. 500 of them would be tutors, so they're specific Welsh language tutors. There is a shortage. We're facing, the more that we grow, obviously, the more the services that we offer grow, we also need to grow our own workforce, and it is a challenge. But we do have a qualification here to become a tutor. So we have tutors in training to gain that qualification. If you are a teacher with a teacher qualification, you can become a Welsh language tutor. So, we even though it's a challenge, having 500 in the workforce and growing is still something that's happening here in Wales. When we were set up in 2016, the workforce itself was an aging workforce. The Welsh language tutors were quite an aging workforce. So we've concentrated quite a lot on attracting new, younger people to join the Welsh language tutor workforce. And again, maybe, getting rid of some of the myths that belong to our own workforce as well, that it doesn't have to have perfect Welsh to be able to deliver Welsh language training. And we've been able to attract a lot of people to the workforce. Unfortunately, some of them are teachers, some are leaving the teaching profession here in Wales. The strain of teaching in schools is quite high, so they are actually coming over to our workforce as well. So we have a framework of providers that we set up right at the very beginning. We have 11 providers, and they employ the tutors. We don't actually employ them from the National Centre. The providers employ the tutors themselves. But we do have the qualification, as I noticed, and we fund that qualification. the award to become a tutor.
So I do have a few more questions about kind of the language learning teaching kind of aspect, but your response just brought up two kind of points, and I actually had on my own notes that I was writing down some questions I had for you that I noticed. You mentioned the tutors themselves don't have to have perfect Welsh, which is an interesting notion, but also during your presentation, you mentioned the skills assessment for employers and a tool that uses AI. And one of the things we've been thinking about when we think about, French language skills in the workplace, which are being asked for from our community for our community to have when they apply for jobs, often employers are bilingual, right? And they don't think what level of bilingualism is needed. They're not necessarily always open to bringing people in the workplace. So does that tool help employers identify what kind of level of language skills they need, or is it to help people kind of self-identify? Could you maybe unpack that tool a little bit more?
Yeah, so it's both, Nick. So individuals would sign up to the level checker, as we call it here in Wales, and they would answer a series of questions. And because the technology is quite clever, it would you kind of recognize straight away what kind of level you would be at. So you don't have to sit there for hours and hours to answer a lot of questions. It would automatically kind of discover the level for you, and it gives you the results on all the 4 different skills, so writing, speaking, listening skills, and it would then give you the results as an individual. But the employer would also, if they choose to use the tool, they would also be given a skills assessment of everybody who's taken the set of questions and the results. So they would then have a baseline, a skills assessment of their workforce. So we've done it on a larger scale with early years, the preschool sector. They used it before they started to do anything else. They used it, on a wide range of people. We're piloting it with quite a few colleges here in Wales. We've just appointed a new full-time person to manage all of that. So it's a significant tool that we're hoping to offer to more and more employers. But also, it's an individual kind of based toolkit as well. An individual can gain a lot from doing it by understanding the levels that they're at on different skills.
As a follow-up here, I see Sarah Lou has asked, would the skill checker assessment be used to exclude people from employment, or is it?
No, basically, as you mentioned, I think, Nick, if you were to ask a person here in Wales, do you speak Welsh? Some who are confident would say yes. Some who don't have the confidence would actually say no, even though they do have some Welsh language skills. So the level checker is kind of an encouraging way of understanding where you're at when it comes to your level of Welsh. And it would also obviously inform you as to where you need to go next to upskill. So what kind of level of training you would need to upskill on different skills.
Okay. The second question, or the thing I was going to ask you that came up in your previous remarks or your previous answer, was just around providers. I think there's a concern in the English-speaking community that we have this kind of idea of this new Francisation Quebec, this big institution, and that it will all be kind of top-down, government-driven agenda and also provision. And we have these amazing community organizations across the province that are really anchored in their community, and some of them have the capacity and interest to deliver this kind of work these kind of services and programs for their own community. So could you maybe unpack the relationship of how this is delivered with partners or not? And I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it sounds quite similar, to be honest with you. When we were set up as a national centre, there was a structure for learning Welsh for adults here in Wales. But as I mentioned, I think there were 6 main centres and there were 26 local providers. It was very much scattered across the whole of Wales, and nobody was strategically responsible for learning Welsh as an adult here in Wales. So when we came into force, people did see us as a threat. They didn't particularly welcome the fact there was a huge change coming to the sector. And also, as I mentioned in the beginning of the speech, we did reduce down the number of providers. So instead of the 6 main, the 26 local, we actually went through a tendering process and we landed on 11 main providers here in Wales. It took a lot of time, there were challenges, legal challenges. It took a lot of our effort in the first 2 years, I would say, to kind of get that structure in place, manage the relationships, for them to understand, our role, that we were also there to support them. We weren't there just to kind of, just to challenge what they were doing, but it's definitely transformed what we do here in Wales. We have now one way of doing things. We have one set of courses, one set of data. It's definitely transformed, and they're still completely within their communities. So each provider is responsible for a certain area in Wales. Here I'm in Cardiff here in Wales. We have a provider specifically for this area. So they do have their own kind of areas and their own local links. They are completely based in the community. The main difference is there's less of them. It's more structure, there's more consistency, and we are the national centre leading on everything to do with learning Welsh for adults.
Okay, so it sounds like you've established some standards, but there is still regional partners involved to perhaps some level of leeway locally.
Yeah, there is. They develop their own program of learning, for instance. So they would plan every year the program that they're going to deliver locally, and that varies from area to area. So, in the more rural areas, their requirements are different to the more, the more urbanised areas here in Wales. So there are differences. The consistency comes with things like fees, what we teach, how we teach it, the policies. There's more consistency from that point of view, but they still have some flexibility locally to deliver what the local people require.
Okay, just returning to the kind of mechanics of the learning, Robin Long asks, on the self-study platform, is there an integrated online tutor for learner support, either through a chatbot or live interaction?
It's live, so yeah, we would have a tutor there live with the learners. But I did mention that the other learning apps say something in Welsh. They're actually introducing bots into their kind of learning delivery method as well. So we're kind of experimenting with that at the moment. But everything we do deliver is with a tutor virtually, or it's actually a pure self-study. There is no tutor there to lead you through. You lead yourself through the course.
Okay, and just for adult learners, which I think people are concerned about learning language later in life, we have Robin Long again asking, is there a concern to frame language skills in the context of digital literacy skills needed in the workforce, or is that something that could be introduced at this stage or at a later date?
Yeah, it's not such a huge challenge. I think I showed you a slide about the audience itself. What we have seen is that traditionally, the age range of our learners used to be quite high towards the upper end of the age. So I think that over 65 was quite significant here as the age of people who were learning Welsh, but we've kind of brought that down. So the percentage of people learning Welsh has actually fallen down, and there's a significant rise in the 18 to 25 age learning Welsh. You could say that that's because we've become more digitally savvy in our delivery. We've lost a few of those older people, but to be honest, our focus is on that younger generation. That's where we see the future of the Welsh language. We're not excluding anybody from any age, but to have that shift was a healthy thing for us to move down to the 18 to 25 age range. Okay,
so I have two more kind of themes that I wanted to touch on you. I see the questions. I mean, the audience can still put some questions in there, but we'll sort of move towards close. The first is just around data. The second is around marketing and promotion. So the data piece is really interesting. I don't know if you know the Quebec context, but even though language is such an important issue in Quebec, we unfortunately only have access to census data every 5 years, which looks at the ties in sort of language and employment together. So we don't have an ongoing picture about language acquisition and learning, and obviously bilingualism is self-reported. So it gets complex to kind of have indicators of success and really to have reliable data. And you mentioned, I think, becoming a data provider, I think was the term you used, or perhaps it's a data surveyor. Could you unpack that a little bit and let us know kind of the role of data in this, and what are the indicators of success for you and for the government and for society in general?
Yeah, this was one of my biggest headaches when I started to work for the National Centre, because the data was so complex. You had 26 providers collating different data, using data in a different way. It wasn't consistent, it wasn't particularly correct. So it was a huge undertaking, but in order to understand the audience, in order to have that, the information that was required, we had to completely set up a complete new data management system. And it took a long time. It took a long time to persuade people to start off with that this was required. We abolished things like, paper registrations in classes, for instance. That was something that was still in force previous to the National Centre setup. So we worked a lot with Welsh Government, with their statistical department. We set up a digital system, and that digital system allowed every tutor to mark registers digitally. So it's a live kind of form of data. So in every class situation, tutors would mark who was present and who was absent from the classes. And that gave us a real insight into things like progression, completion, retention. We just understood really where things were going well and things were going not as well. So we did become a publisher, as kind of an official status here in Wales. So we have a code of practice that we have to follow. We're kind of scrutinised on the way that we collate and publish our data. But the key to all of that really was having the digital platform with the reporting and data management system kind of integrated into all of that. So, as you can imagine, 13,000 or 15,000 learners, with the 11 providers, all the workforce, everybody is on that platform every single day. Every part of their learning journey is recorded on that digital platform. So the intelligence that we have now for the sector is vast. It's nearly so vast. We're kind of struggling to kind of keep up with the data that we have, but we do have an officer, a full-time officer that's responsible for that data analysis work. And it's kind of informing Welsh Government as well about, the trends and the information that we gather. So we ask questions such as their educational background for the purpose of, of a Welsh medium education or not. We ask them why they learn the language. We ask them questions about, if they're learning for a family perspective or from a work perspective. So we gather a lot of information about our learners. And from the 15,000 who are learning with us, we have something like 80,000 people who have an account on our platform. So, we have lots of warm leads that we kind of communicate with really, really often to try and generate interest in what we offer.
Okay. And that's a good segue into the kind of marketing and promotion piece. So often, program delivery, we think of these great programs. Even in the policy world, we issue reports, but then we forget about promoting it, marketing it, doing the outreach. Can you speak a bit about how perhaps marketing and outreach? I know you mentioned in your remarks, but how that's tied to your success, or perhaps not, but kind of your thinking around marketing and outreach.
Yeah, I'm sure our marketing and comms director would say it's completely tied in, and I'm sure that there's an element of truth in that. What we do have campaigns every year, so we have 2 campaigns per year to try and generate, that interest in the Learn Welsh program that we have available. So a lot of it is done via Facebook. The audience that we have are majority, female of a certain age. So we kind of target, that particular audience. So a lot of it is done via Facebook. We've tried things like TV ads, big campaigns in urban areas. They don't really generate the same type of interest as we have via things like Facebook. So our marketing budget is relatively small, but we're just trying to be creative in the way that we do things. And we also generate a lot of interest in some of the partnerships that we've established. So like the one with the Football Association Wales, it generated a huge interest in our work. And through that, obviously the traffic to our website increased, the registrations on our courses increased. So we're kind of organically marketing as well as kind of the more traditional routes of marketing as well. And in order to reach that younger audience, we're kind of taking, a dip into kind of the TikTok world, the Instagram world, things that I don't particularly understand, but, there's a lot.
Welsh talk, is that what it is? Welsh talk?
No, it's called TikTok. But yeah, there's, we're kind of taking inroads into different kind of avenues of marketing really, and kind of monitoring how that is going as well.
Okay. Well, do you have anything else to add? I think we're going to move to kind of thanking you, but obviously you've been very generous with your time.
Thank you. No, thank you. It's really interesting to hear from your perspective as well. And, I'd be interested in coming back and hearing how your kind of, journey is going as well in the future.
Well, hopefully we can kind of have you here, or perhaps some of us can make our way out to Wales one day. But I wanted to thank you on behalf of PERT, the Provincial Employment Roundtable, and all our partners There's some, rave reviews coming in from the audience. Paul Tonkin says, thank you, Donna. Cillian Cooper says, very interesting presentation. Kathy Brown says, amazing presentation. Congratulations, Donna. Diane says, very interesting. Thank you. Dana Conrado says, wonderful presentation. Loved it. Susanna Tang says, great presentation, really highlights the possibilities. And I think that's, one of the reasons we wanted to invite you. It highlights the possibilities. You're obviously ahead of us here in the Quebec context in terms of what you've done, and you've accomplished some great things. So thank you again for spending the time with us and for sharing. And I hope you can perhaps join us for some other sessions, but we'll definitely keep in contact over the coming weeks and years.
Fantastic. Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks. And for those attendees, I'm just going to make sure I'm getting this right, but I believe our next session, we're going to have a nice generous lunch break for you all to grab a coffee, grab some food. And our next session, our next panel will be at 1 o'clock. So we'll be restarting again at 1 o'clock. It's the employment issues and needs among Quebec's English speakers panel that'll be moderated by Sta Cruz-Voantsva, our Director of Policy and Research, featuring the fantastic Trina Bélanger, from Cray Point Clare, Alan Richards from the Executive Director at CASA, and Cassandra Kernison, Executive Director at DESTA. So don't miss our next panel at 1 o'clock, and thank you for staying with us this morning, and we'll see you this afternoon.
So I'll say let's get started. So Quebec's labor market and economic conditions have become a challenging landscape for employers and employees over the past few years, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. When it comes to English speakers in Quebec, navigating the labor market as a linguistic minority comes with its own unique challenges. In 2021, PERT conducted a survey on the employment issues and needs facing Quebec's English speakers. Needless to say, there are several challenges that are facing our communities, including access to employment services, unemployment, and French language barriers. We are pleased to be bringing together experts from organizations who are working to improve the employability and address the employment issues facing English-speaking Quebecers, who will be sharing their perspectives from the field. We hope that this conversation can highlight some of these issues and the solutions that are needed. So to start off our conference, I'll be introducing our wonderful panelists. So first, down to my right here, I can see Cassandra. So Cassandra Kernison is the Executive Director of the DESTA Black Youth Network. We also have Trina Bélanger, who is a Coordinator and Employment Counselor at the Centre de Recherche d'Emploi de Pointe-Claire. And then we also have Alan Richards. On our screen, you might see Casa Richards, but his name is Alan Richards, who is the Executive Director of the Committee for Anglophone Social Action, also known as CASA. I would like each panelist to take about 3 minutes to introduce themselves and also share with us what are some of the largest barriers to employment that you have seen in your work with English speakers in Quebec. So I'll start with you, Alan. I'll give you about 3 minutes to respond. And just a reminder, I'll be using the hand raise reaction when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you to PERT for the invitation to come and share the perspective of CASA and Gaspésians. So Alan Richards, I live in the Baie des Chaleurs area of the Gaspé. I'm a born and raised Gaspésian, and like many of my fellow Gaspésians, I've lived outside of the region and actually lived and worked across Canada for some 10 years until I finally decided to come home in 1999. Since my return, I've been working in the community sector and mostly relating to employability and economic development. So I've only been executive director of CASA since September 2021, so a little over a year. And while I'm relatively new to the position, I do have many years of experience with the community, especially the English-speaking community of the Gaspé. So CASA is a multi-sectorial organization. We work with the English-speaking community. We have been doing so since 1975. We offer programs and services for English-speaking Gaspésians of all ages, ranging from health and social service access to employment, recruitment and retention, arts, culture, heritage, tourism. We're a small community, and there's a lack of specialized organizations that offer services in English. So that means CASA's had to step into many of these sectors to help address the gaps in services and resources. So we offer employment services under contract with some local CJEs and other employability organizations due to their lack of capacity of their teams to serve English speakers. We run PPE, so Préparation pour l'Emploi programs that work with those who are farthest from the labor market, and we provide direct referrals for education and training, CV writing, job searches for those who are ready. So having said that, the barriers we recognize for English speakers in the Gaspé to integrate the labor market, they're varied across the region and across age groups. Depending on the client, they could have needs related to simple job search or CV writing, to poverty, substance abuse, skills gaps, and some of our residents are simply not even participating in the system. Many don't have basic documentation like birth certificates or SIN numbers. So we see a very special situation when you realize that as I sit here today, there are 1,660 vacant jobs in the Gaspé right now. And we have sections of our population that are experiencing close to 30% unemployment. So a dilemma there. There's very large portions of those who are working in our region, especially in the English-speaking community, but the broader community as well that hold seasonal jobs, fishing, agriculture, and forestry. And unfortunately, many are not looking for year-round employment. They've been doing this for a while, and this is how they want to do it. So I see the hand. I look forward to the conversation. I appreciate the invite, and I'll share my 2 cents later.
Great, thank you, Alan. I'll now ask you, Cassandra.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. So yes, I am the Executive Director at DESTA Black Community Network, and we work specifically with the Black English-speaking community in Montreal. So this is a double minority group that faces additional barriers to employment that I think, I don't want to say are obvious, but, you know, I think not having the language or having to overcome language barriers, as well as the systemic racism that's embedded in the system that we live in, makes it very difficult for the community to be able to advance when we talk about employability. So our organization really works from the perspective of helping the community, members of the community, to overcome these barriers, you know, providing opportunities, but also working, you know, working with companies, working to spread awareness with regards to discrimination, racism, and just being more inclusive in a lot of these spaces to really encourage diversity, to really reflect what Quebec is, which is a very diverse society. So I look forward as well to the conversation. Again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Cassandra. And lastly, we have Trina Bélanger.
Hi, so my name is Trina Bélanger. I am the coordinator and employment counselor at the Centre de Recherche d'Emploi in Pointe-Claire. I'd like to take the opportunity to say thank you to PERT for inviting me here today. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion. As for a little bit of my background, so from my biography, you can see I'm a military spouse. I have had the opportunity really to travel throughout the world, you know, looking at many different aspects of not only employability, but also in the educational system as well. My background originally was in teaching, so I have taught for a number of years and transferred over into the education, into the employment field. When I lived in Ontario, I had that opportunity and really fell in love with the actual sector itself and finding ways to kind of connect with different people from different organizations. Right now, my position is in the West Island of Montreal. We receive a lot of different immigrants within the area. A lot of those immigrants are coming with different baggage, different barriers, different needs, and a lot of times it is the language that is being kind of spoken the most as being a barrier. A lot of times they're coming here speaking English only as their second language, speaking their language of origins, certainly as their native tongue, and then trying to learn how to speak a third language sometimes is quite difficult as well. Where clients are anywhere from age 16 and above, So we have been able to adapt and change our program to help really specifically focus on these barriers that they have. Language is just not the only one. Certainly we have a job to do with providing maybe access to these services, making them aware of what is available to them as an English-speaking Quebecer in the area. Not only that, but just showing them and helping them and guiding them to the rights as a Quebec. In the Quebec community for employment. So that's one of the things that we've been kind of working on, allowing them to see what kinds of rates that they do have. And certainly the difficulty in getting training within the area. I know we have a lot of opportunities within French, but we do have some in English, and sometimes it's just not equal, or it's exactly what they're looking for in order to help them to obtain employment.
Great, thank you, Trina. Just going to put the hand down there. So thank you to our panelists for introducing themselves. So I have some questions that I've prepared for each of you. So I'll just go back in the order that I asked you each to speak. I'll start with you, Alan. So Alan, just based on your experience, how can we best promote the inclusion and the integration of English-speaking Quebecers in today's labor market? And you could speak to your experiences in Gaspésie, but also more broadly across the province.
Yeah, I think so while my answers are based in the work that we're doing here in Gaspé, I think a lot of them are probably very transferable to elsewhere in the province. And actually, it's interesting, Trina, Trina was just talking about understanding about what's out there in terms of services and resources is a major barrier for our community in the Gaspé for employment services, but for, I would say, most of the government offered services, just a real lack of awareness about what's out there and a misperception about who those services are for. And so oftentimes we find that people of the English-speaking community aren't necessarily seeing themselves as being the clients of the Services Quebec, the Carrefour Jeunesses, and the Service de l'Emploi, mostly because the information that's coming out is predominantly in French, and the advertising, the promotion, they're usually through venues such as French newspapers, French radio stations, French social media. So not even in the regular streams of communications that English speakers tend to use. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing at CASA has been about, yes, building the awareness of our community about what's out there, but really working with the partners so that they can understand the differences in how they approach the broader French-speaking community and the English-speaking community. It's been a real work in progress in terms of getting, first of all, the leaders, the management of these organizations to understand that there's a difference beyond language. You can't just translate a flyer and say you've done your job and you're serving English speakers. And then when we finally did get there and they got it, now they're coming towards us and saying, hey, yeah, we realize that at Service Quebec, for instance, they've reached out to us and said that while English speakers are about 10% of the population, we're overrepresented in their clientele for social assistance and employment programs. And so they're really struggling, even though they have staff who can speak some English, to cross the cultural barrier in terms of how they interact with those individuals, how they reach them, and ultimately how they get them the support that they need. Because like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the clients that are coming to them have a whole host of needs above and beyond just job search and CVs. They might need they might need to see other professionals for other things that are going on. And we're running a NIF program right now, a NIF project, so the Ni en emploi, ni en éducation ou formation, with our partners, all of our employability partners, to look at what services they offer, but also we're doing some outreach to people who aren't currently accessing our services, young people who aren't currently accessing our services, to ask them why not and what their needs are, so that we can, one, identify where some of the gaps are, but two, work with our partners so that we can have a way that we can collect information and share information quickly, so that we can refer these clients to the best place. If it's training, if it's health and social services, if it's job writing, if it's, whatever the service that they need, that we'll be able to turn quicker, know where they should go, so that instead of the client having to navigate the system can guide the client to the appropriate services. And so awareness has been a huge piece of what I think our role is. And when you ask the question, what is your role? I realize there are many different organizations around this table right now on this call with many different mandates and approaches. So my answer, I think, is more specific towards CASA, but I believe that there is a broader role there for the English-speaking community and the organizations that support it to work with our partners across the province on these issues.
Okay. Cassandra, Trina, is there anything you'd want to add to that? Just the idea of promoting, the inclusion and the integration of English speakers. I'll start with you, Cassandra.
Well, speaking from the work that we're doing at DESTA, I think, where it becomes very challenging is that we are, we're not the only organization in Montreal doing this work specifically for the Black English-speaking community, but these organizations tend to be underfunded, and we tend to work in our silos versus really coming together and bringing our resources together to make an impact. And I think, we really need to start looking or approaching the problem from that perspective, because, there are resources, there are programs that are there to support communities that are struggling. But I think, when you look at organizations, a lot of these organizations have capacity issues, have funding issues. So I think, that's a big challenge to overcome with regards to this work.
Trina, anything to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I like the fact that, Cassandra, you brought up the funding issue, because I think all of us are always looking for more funding so we can do more with what we have. Being a very small team in Pointe Claire, there's 5 of us that work out of our office. It can be very challenging in that aspect, but I think the idea of just being able to provide the opportunities and just to show them what the opportunities are within our area. Like I said, we're in the West Island. Sometimes they don't know where to look. So it gives us that opportunity to be able to share those opportunities, but we need somebody who's there doing that as well. So we can't just have an employment counselor doing one specific thing. We need somebody who's researching and kind of making those connections and being able to provide the support on both sides of things. Our mandate is with Service Quebec for our services. And, really once they find employment, that's kind of technically the end of the road for us. And we hand them off to the employer. But I think more needs to be done, with being able to provide the support on both sides of things to make sure if there are issues when they're in their job, that we're able to provide them with solutions, or just sometimes to mediate, just sometimes to express what's really going on. Sometimes as an English speaker, they're not comfortable with doing that with a new employer because they're afraid that they're going to lose their job. So just maybe having those extra resources that are out there to help provide the support, for the English-speaking community would be very beneficial.
So one of the things that I think you've all mentioned is just the important role of employers, right? So I have this question for you first, Cassandra, and Alan and Trina, you can respond. But what really is the role of employers in bridging the unemployment gap between French speakers and English speakers in Quebec, but also just more broadly, right? Addressing some of these issues, and maybe you can speak to your experience working with employers as well.
Yes, definitely. I think employers have a big role to play. I think that, you know, there's an awareness that needs to be definitely encouraged among employers, because not everyone sees these issues or sees these issues as important or prioritizes these issues. But in our work with employers, we really make it a point to educate where education is required in terms of just the value of diversity. And, you know, just to be completely transparent, at DESTA, yes, we do work to overcome language barriers, but, you know, on top of that, or a priority for us is really overcoming the systemic racial barriers that our community faces. So we really work with diversity and inclusion programs. We have a consultant that we work with that we send into these companies, and you know, we usually do not partner with an organization unless they've done the work when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because what we found is that sometimes we'll place our participants in a job which looks great on paper, but then, you know, the trauma that they live in these spaces it does them more harm than good, right? And then they come out worse than they went in. So, you know, there's a lot of education that needs to be done when we're talking about spaces that are majority white, that may not be so friendly to diversity. So we do, you know, we're starting to do a lot more work with that, and we're starting to really raise the awareness. And I'm finding that within the companies, the corporate landscape, the awareness is increasing rapidly. Like it's a time of great change. It's a time where we have companies coming to us saying, you know, we want to diversify our employees. We see the value. Help us to do this, right? So that's very encouraging, and you know, we really like to work from that perspective.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Cassandra, especially the importance of that intersectional approach, right? That there's language, but there's other aspects of, you know, people's identity. They're not just, you know, an English speaker. They can be a woman, they can be racialized, you know, they can be an interprovincial migrant, a newcomer. So I think, you know, employers need to become more conscious of this, but also just understand that language is also just, you know, an obvious barrier that they could easily tackle in addition to these issues. So I'll give you a chance to respond. Alan or Trina, if there's anything you want to add just more broadly to that question of the role of employers. So you could speak to some of the work that you've done with employers in addressing unemployment, or if maybe you want to just more broadly question that idea of, you know, where should employers really be in that discussion around employment. I'll start with you, Alan.
Sure. Great answer, Cassandra. I think it leads quite well. I guess I just have an anecdote I think that I could say about some work that we've been doing with a local employer, but it really highlights the change in the mindset that employers are going to have to go through as they struggle to find positions, but also as they look to diversify their workforce. So a local fish plant here had been searching for employees. They couldn't fill about 40 of their positions right before the crab season was supposed to start in the spring. And one of the foremen there, who is incidentally a friend, was asking, said, you know, we don't have English speakers that work for us. We kind of, and I was saying, well, that's really interesting. I said, why do you think that is? And they said, well, you know, we don't really think that the English community like this type of work. And I said, well, it's a pretty broad statement. Have you ever, you know, figured out why that is? And so as we kept speaking about it, CASA, the role for CASA, building awareness again, came up in that we organized with them visits of our PPE students to their plant, and basically found out there was a lot of misunderstanding about what the job was, what it required from the workers. People thought that they had to show up with, you know, a bunch of expensive equipment. Other people thought they needed specialized training and different machines and whatnot. And after they did the initial kind of visits and question Q&As, it was interesting to see how through the social networks of the PPE students, other people started coming out of the woodwork, because now the message was out there that this was a job that was accessible for English speakers. And the employers now run these these kind of activities on their own, and they've understood that they need to do things differently as well in order to attract these workers. They can't just throw up bilingual job postings as they've always done in the French newspaper and expect to have a flood of applicants. And so I think the role of employers going forward, it becomes so much more important because of the competitiveness of the labor market right now, or I should say the lack of competitiveness. And so they need to make sure that they're changing their approaches, they're adapting their approaches so that they can reach out. And to go back to promoting the opportunity of these workers to these employers, I think that mindset change is starting to happen, and I think we'll see it more and more as people are finding it hard to fill spaces in their workforce. But definitely it's something that's come up more and more, that the awareness is starting to grow, and we're at the cusp of something really important, I think. But
thanks for sharing that, Alan. I mean, I think from that antidote, like what's interesting, right, is that employment can be intimidating, right? So I think that opportunity to really, for employers to open up, right, and beyond just the job interview or the job posting, to allow employees to, meet them face to face, or to see the site, or to get a better understanding of the role, and maybe, in some ways assess their French language skills. I'm sure you could elaborate on your example that, some people probably thought that the language barrier would prevent them from doing this work, and they learned that actually this was something they could participate in. So that's a really interesting example. Trina, is there anything you'd want to add around the role of employers?
Yeah, I agree. I really like how Cassandra had answered the question. I think you brought up a lot of strong points with regards to, the Black community and so forth. Alan as well, I really like the idea. I liked your example of bringing the actual students or the group into the work area. I think that's a really interesting approach. Not only does it give the opportunity for the students to see what's going on, but it also gives an opportunity for the employers to meet some of these candidates that could be potentially working for them. It's quite an interesting, I guess, twist to kind of solve the actual problem. I know as well, like I said, we deal a lot with new immigrants within the area, and a lot of times we see a lot of programs for, or starting to see a lot of change for new immigrants being welcomed into the workforce, and the inclusion with that there. And I think there's a lot that we can learn for English speakers as well from what's being done. I think there's some things that we can take with regards to the integration of a new immigrant into the working community, that maybe we can apply for the English speaking as well. You see a lot of things as well, and I'm going back to immigrants again because it seems it's a big area of clientele for us, that they are getting support to integrate within an Anglophone community, but now we actually need to integrate them into the French community as well to be able to go speak with the employers. So, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, like Alan said, within the aspect of employers, and as well the aspect of some of the job searchers that we have within all of our organizations. So I think just bringing those things to light, I think is quite an interesting aspect as well.
Great, thank you, Trina. And next question I have is actually for you. So this is just wanting to dig a little bit deeper into the realm of employment services. I think some people haven't always, had the experience of working with an employment counselor, and they're not sure about, what that world looks like. But if you can just tell us a little bit more about the employment services that your organization offers, but also what are some of the barriers that you've witnessed in terms of the clients that are coming into you, and have those barriers changed over time? Is there, anything new that you're seeing in your field?
For sure. My story is very similar to some of my clients that I have. I am an English speaker. I followed my husband to 5 different cities throughout Quebec, not speaking English when I first, not speaking French, sorry, when I first got here. So I get some of the barriers that are there, and obviously the most, I think, apparent to that is the language barrier, because a lot of times you may be able to understand, because that's usually the first thing that we learn as an English speaker, is that we can listen and understand, but being able to respond then takes more time. So I think, you know, like I said, the barrier is the language, but oftentimes too, when you do actually work, and I'm working in a very French situation where any reports I have to write are written in French as well. So we're looking at areas of not only oral language, but the written language as well. So when people are looking for employment and they have to write a report, and it's going to, you know, higher above, whether it's going to government services, looking for funding, whatever it is, it's all being written in French. So those are some of the issues that we're seeing with a lot of our clients, is learning how to do those pieces to be able to perform the actual tasks that they need to do to complete their jobs. We also see, I think within our organization, sometimes it's a lack of confidence. As an adult and you're learning a new language, sometimes you're not as comfortable maybe trying to put forth these, not so much the effort, but you don't want to make a mistake because you don't want to say the word incorrectly. So the actual context of what you're trying to say comes out completely different from what you're actually meaning. So sometimes some of the issues aren't just the language, but now we're seeing as well that confidence or that fear of failing or the fear of making a mistake. Whereas, you know, when we're kids, we don't have the same kind of fears. Certainly within the last probably 2-3 years, and I think everybody can attest to that, we're seeing a lot more mental issues coming through our doors. So yes, people are looking for work, but we're also getting a lot of people that have gone through depression, anxiety, you know, the stress of needing to find work just in order to, you know, pay the bills and so forth. So we're not just dealing with employment, you know, like Alan said, we're not just writing a resume now, we're also looking at some of these other issues because they're barriers for them to find jobs within their field. So we're actually having to look at ways of connecting those people, and it goes back into where can we help those people or send them to an organization where they can receive that service in English as well. So, you know, it's kind of a big role. And I think as an employment center in itself, we've learned to develop and change and modify. We're still trying to do better, but I'm sure everybody's kind of going to be in the same boat, is trying to use the resources that we have to come up with the solutions to better offer a service to the English-speaking community that are coming through our doors.
Thank you, Trina. I'll throw it back to you, Alan, just if you want to comment more broadly on some of the barriers that you've seen. So maybe specifically in the context working with CASA and in your region, what are the realms, what are in the realm of employment, what are the barriers that are you seeing?
Yeah, interestingly enough, we probably couldn't be in more different areas, but I have a lot in common with Trina in terms of what we're seeing. For sure, we are seeing people come in with varied needs now, and a lot of things. People aren't okay in some cases, and you know, getting them the help that they need has been a big barrier for them. For CASA, I guess I'm harking on this, but it's really been about working with employers and service providers to get them to know better what the English-speaking community is, who we are, what our needs are, but more importantly, the potential, the opportunity that they provide to them. A little anecdote, we're working with tourism operators right now, and it took us years to help them to understand the opportunity there was associated with having somebody who spoke English in their building. They work in tourism where they're receiving people from all over the world, but for years, CASA has had 90% tourism has been from French speakers. But as we go forward, more and more English speakers are coming to the area. And in fact, CASA is even trying to promote tourism to English speakers. And so working with those employers to help them to understand if you can serve this new clientele, the potential markets are much larger and a lot closer than a lot of the markets that they're currently serving to. So been a big shift there in terms of getting first people to understand that there's an opportunity associated with having an English speaker, and it's not just going to be difficult for your managers to deal with that person because they have language issues. But secondly, that that this is also something that they have to build within their own organization. And how do you build that capacity, within your own organization? And I come back to what Trina was talking about, is often as English speakers, I'm pretty fluent in French, but there's a lot of people who speak a lot of French but don't consider themselves very good at French. And so when they see a job posting, especially in the tourism industry, for somebody that's bilingual, they say, well, my French is pretty good, but I'm not bilingual and probably wouldn't be able to speak enough French for that job, when in fact the vocabulary is probably very limited and easily learnable. And brings me to my next point, I think, is the challenge of also trying to tailor French second language learning opportunities to the seekers. So it's not feasible for everybody to take 5 months and go to university and learn how to speak French. A lot of people are just struggling to get by. They're working any job that they can. And so, they just don't have the time to do it on their own time. So I think helping employers get to the point where they are going to be offering these things during work hours, tailored to the jobs that are in their organization, I think has been a big hurdle, but we're seeing it happen. We're seeing it start, I should say, with the tourism industry in the Gaspé. And so I think that it's been a hurdle. It's also something that's emerging and is very satisfying. But now there's all these other sectors and industries that are left to attack. So yeah, it's been a big thing for us. And again, I come back to it's understanding, it's awareness, it's perception. Often it's insane that it's boiled down to those things, but that's a lot of what we see in terms of challenges.
Thanks, Alan. Cassandra, anything you want to add to that, or in response to some of the other barriers that you're seeing?
Sure. So one of the big ones I find, especially within the Black English-speaking community, is a lack of network and access to networks, which is so important when we're talking about employability. And from time to time, we as an organization, we get challenged on the fact that we're serving the Black community, but we're serving primarily Anglophones. People will say, well, there's so many French-speaking Black Montrealers that can benefit from your services, which is very true. I'm not going to deny that, but I think the advantage that having the language has, for minorities, is that they have more of an ability to build a network. There's strength in numbers. There's a little bit more access for them. I'm not going to say that it's still not challenging, but with the English community, it's a very difficult thing. And we have, one of the things that we've seen is that there's also like a resistance, right? That stems from history and politics. There's a resistance to maybe sometimes integrate into the Quebec population. So then you create like these isolated pockets of society, which doesn't serve when you're trying to really tackle this employability question and really give people opportunities and access to opportunities. So I would say networks is a big one. So we've been really working towards, helping people, exposing people to different networks, bringing people together, because it's so important. It's so important to know people, to know the right people, and really have those connections to be able to build that career for yourself. So.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So I'll move on to some general questions. So whoever wants to jump in, feel free to. But one of the things that has stood out to me just in all of your responses is, I think one of you said that people are not okay, right? And that's very interesting to hear, and I think probably unsurprising for a lot of the people who are hearing this. and you are all in some form working with service delivery, you're working directly with people. So I don't know if anyone wants to maybe elaborate on that in terms of, what is going on? Is it mental health? Are there other impacts that you're seeing in your community? And how are those kind of playing into the problem of employment and employability for English speakers?
I made the statement, so I could start. Yeah, and I guess we're in a privileged position at CASA to be kind of aware of that because of the different clients that we see. We have we do interventions with the local CIS, with the local CLSCs and social workers. When they're not able to speak English, we'll send people along so that we can be that cultural bridge, if you will. The language is part of it, but it's also kind of the dealing with the people from our community. And more the employability team, when we're having meetings and talking about how things are going, are just bringing this up, that once they start to scratch the surface, they're finding there's all these other things that we need to get taken care of before we could even start to think about going for training or starting to look for a job. And in fact, we've had to bolster our health and social services team with some mental health workers. We've put together some well-being trainings and workshops, and we started to create some specific, what we call corridors of service at the CLSC, so that we can help when we identify people who are not in crisis but at risk, to be able to access those services that they need quickly, and not have to try to navigate the system, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, we see it a lot more, and in the youth activities that we do, a lot of mental health. In older people, it's like everywhere. So it's why when I made the broad statement, it was really it's a theme at our team meetings these days because of the clients that we're meeting on a daily basis.
Your microphone is off.
Thanks, Trina. I was saying, Trina, Cassandra, anything you want to add in terms of what you've seen? Maybe in response to the statement, people are not okay. Are you seeing those mental health issues? Are you seeing the need for more wraparound supports in addition to providing employability support?
Yeah, I could speak to that. I mean, definitely. I think, pre-COVID, it was an issue. And I think with COVID, it just magnified. So I think this is actually an area where, when I spoke about capacity and resources, this is an area where, for sure, we as an organization, we're struggling, just because there's so much to answer, and we're not finding the resources or the capacity right now. We partner with several other organizations that also serve the Black community, but we're really looking to build on these issues of mental health, physical health, which is very much tied in to that. But yeah, we're dealing with people who were already isolated, who experienced a whole other level of isolation with COVID. And now coming out of it, it's like we're starting to see the effects and how deep the effects are. And, for sure within our community, it's been, when I say our community, the Black community specifically, it's been historically, a stigmatized topic. The community doesn't like to talk about it. Things are changing, things are getting better because for example, we launched a program. It's a monthly program to bring the community together. We launched it back in May, and the response has been huge. Like, we sell out, we put the registrations out, and then within 2-3 days, it's full. So the community is now becoming more and more receptive and responsive to these things, which also really demonstrates the need. And we're getting so much positive feedback. Although we can't address everything in these sessions, we're bringing the community together. People are talking about it. People are exchanging resources. And that's been a huge thing with regards to, you can't just tackle an employability issue. There are other things that are, underlying that really need to be addressed in order to say we're really addressing the problem or the problems.
Great, thank you, Cassandra. Trina, did you have anything to add?
I agree. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of seeing pretty much the same thing, even in the West Island. When it comes to the clients, certainly mental health is a huge issue. There's probably a very small percentage of clients that are coming through doors that don't have some form of mental health issue that we're needing to address and find resources. So, you know, it's definitely become a big piece to have to find the answers to. And like Cassandra, we're struggling to kind of find, you know, the capacity to be able to do all of this, plus the job that we're being paid to do, plus as well, then you have the other side of the employer. So, you know, you're kind of trying to balance all of that in order to provide the best support possible, because I think we're all pretty passionate about what we do. We're pretty passionate about making sure that we're being able to answer and find solutions for the people that are coming through our doors. You know, a lot of times, I like the idea, Alan, that you were talking about bringing in resources to do workshops. You know, that's one thing we have talked about in our team meetings as well, is having somebody come in and discuss how to deal with and talk about and make the conversation a little more smooth with our clients when it comes to talking about mental health, because there is a stigma. It's still there. It's still going to exist. It's going to exist for a while, unfortunately. But just having the ability to open up that barrier and discuss it is at least one step to finding a solution, and then being able to support. I have if you'll permit me, I have a client right now. She was a client of mine last spring. She's a young client, finished studies, still going on with studies, was looking for employment. And I was kind of thinking, you know, okay, well, she's youth. She's just not being as proactive as what she could be. You know, unfortunately, I took that thinking. I have youth at home, so, you know, sometimes I understand sometimes what can happen. And finally, she emailed me and she said, she told me, you know, Trina, I'm really struggling right now. I've actually gone to see a psychiatrist because I'm struggling with a lot of mental health issues right now. And that's why I'm not doing what she was doing. And she's like, can you still help me continue to support? Send me some things. Can we, you know, so I was kind of like, oh my God, you take a step back, but until you have the information, you can't find ways to overcome that. So I've met with her, we've discussed the barriers, we've kind of had that conversation. And as opposed to me kind of giving her the positions and allowing her to apply for the positions and following up the employers, it's a piece that I'm doing with her on our calls. Like when we're on the phone, when we're there, I've taken the action of doing it and with her, not for her, but with her. So she's still feeling like she's part of the thing. So I think there's ways that, you know, as employment counselors and services that are trying to help with employment, there's certainly ways that we can, you know, maybe try and help bridge that gap as well. But again, it's the resources, and, you know, we're all stretched. So it's trying to find that balance, I think, for everything.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Trina. I mean, on that topic of just, you know, everyone being stretched, right, and the limited resources, I think you've all said that in some way or another. I don't know if there's anything you want to just elaborate around that issue of funding and what organizations are going through right now, given that it seems like you have higher workloads, but what is kind of the funding landscape for you? I don't know if anyone wants to take that question first.
I can jump in. So, I mean, for us, we are able to get quite a bit of funding for our programs. But when it comes to what we call core funding, or being able to support our operations, for example, for, you know, director level positions, or, you know, outreach and communications, positions that would serve across different programs, and then just the overall infrastructure of the organization, it's very difficult. And it puts us into this constant loop of like this program focus versus like an organization that, you know, where we're here, we have our mission, we're here to serve, and we can build on that. It's really, okay, this program is this, and it puts us into this kind of like narrow-minded way of thinking and operating. So I think that's definitely a challenge, just being able to access core funding for the organization that's sustainable, that will last many years, so that it's not like, you know, you have a program here, then you have to take it away, or you have to pull it back, or, you know, you have to hire staff and then lay off staff. You know, that type of a situation makes providing these services very difficult and not consistent. And that's what's needed. We need consistency. We need, you know, for the community to be able to rely on these organizations. And so I think that's a big challenge for not just us, but many organizations. I've heard, I think almost all nonprofit organizations say the same thing. So that's a big one.
Thanks for sharing that, Cassandra. Alan, Trina, anything to add to that?
For sure. I know for us over the past couple of years, for those of you who know me, we actually closed out a center recently, and we've had funding cutbacks over the last couple of years for our services, seeing the unemployment rate being very low. So, you know, you're constantly trying to figure out ways, to find funding to be able to do everything that you want to do, to be able to help all these people that are coming through your doors. And I think it's becoming very creative with the funding that we have and partnering with other organizations. You know, it's one of the things I think that we talk about in our sectoral table for employment is, you know, how can we support each other? Because we talk about promotion. I don't have a budget to go and promote my organization. I don't have, you know, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to hire somebody on to do all these fancy things. Like a lot of the stuff that we have is in-house, but being able to sustain all of that, you know, sometimes we have great ideas of what we want to do, but being able to maintain it is a whole other thing. So just being able to partner, I think, you know, and have the opportunity to partner with other community organizations and with other, you know, organizations like PERT gives us that opportunity to do that and see how we can kind of do that together as a whole, as opposed to everybody trying to do everything all themselves. I think is quite interesting. If anybody has suggestions for funding, you know, I think we'd all be widely available and, you know, eager to learn some new opportunities and so forth. But it certainly is something we think about every year, and it's something that we have to renew every year. That's it, you know. So I know for us, that's kind of a big piece, and we've already started the discussions for what are we going to do next year, so that we are not cut back on our budget, so that we can maintain and continue to grow and develop what we have put in place for this year. So it's definitely, I think, on the forefront of everybody's thinking within the next little while in our negotiations for our contracts coming up in this after Christmas or early spring for the programs for Service Quebec.
Great. Alan, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just I guess to give a bit of our perspective. So we are very fortunate being one of the only games in town for English speakers. We are fortunate to have some what I guess we call core funding, so to support the overhead of administration and whatnot. So we get some money from Canadian Heritage, and now we also have some money coming from the Secretariat that helps us to have satellite offices and increase our capacity. So having said that, you know, we are still very much you know, project-driven organization in that you know, 21 employees, 17 of those are, you know, have a finite end to their project. And granted, we can renew the projects, and we have over time. It still takes resources to be able to go out and write the proposals and, you know, do the follow-up and the reporting and everything that's associated with it. Is kind of the nature. So I agree, Cassandra, most not-for-profits are that's a struggle for us. And I will say too, having worked with many partners who are like a specialized partner that are working with the provincial funding, you know, that the funding is based on the clients served. You know, so one client served equals so much funding. In this in this situation that we're in, where it's not just about meeting with a client to do the CV. There's all these other things over here that you have to take care of that's not being compensated through your contract for that employability service. So at CASA, we are fortunate again that we have all these other projects that we can lean on, where we're leaning on our mental health team to help this employability client. And I see so many other organizations like Carrefour Jeunesse and Service d'Aide à l'Emploi and other employability service providers that just don't have that opportunity because they have what they have. So yeah, I totally see it as a big challenge for many organizations. And like I say, CASA is fortunate, but it's not doesn't come without its pains. And things are good right now. It doesn't say that in 5 years we wouldn't be up in a different situation as well.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. I just really wanted to jump on the last thing that Trina said, though, about
Yeah,
working
go
in
ahead.
partnership. And that has been, I think, the huge key for our success, or the success that we have had in the gas space, just working with so many other people and other organizations that have similar mandates or adjacent mandates, or mandates that have to do with what we're doing. And you use PERT as the example. So that NEEF project that I talked about earlier, that's a action research project. So there's a big research component to that. We don't have the internal capacity to be able to develop methodologies and surveys and whatnot that would be a solid research piece. And so PERT is able to do that for us. And I think as an English-speaking community, being the size that we are across the province, it only makes sense. There's only wins in it if we can start to lean on each other and use each other in that way. I think that's the key. In the same way that here on the coast, we're partnered with all these different organizations, depending on who they're trying to serve, that we can bring them in when we need them. I think we should be totally doing that across the English-speaking community. It's essential these days.
Yeah, I can't echo enough just the importance of partnerships, right? I think, Cassandra, you said earlier about the issue of working in silos as organizations, right? So there's definitely, I think, a lot more that we can accomplish as organizations when we are at least, staying in touch and figuring out how we can pull resources together. So I want to jump to another question that I had. So this goes back to this employment issues and needs survey that PERT conducted last year. So we surveyed organizations such as yourselves, and in that survey, we got a pretty astounding number. So 46% of organizations in that survey indicated that there was a lack of information and resources on employment and training that was reaching participants. And they said that this lack of information and awareness was actually acting as a barrier for English speakers in the labor market. So I don't know if there's any reactions when you hear that around the issue of awareness and reaching your communities, or maybe you can speak to some innovations that you found to kind of get around that. Feel free, whoever wants to jump in.
So I think for us, kind of looking at the training piece is it's kind of, we have some resources in the area. Do the resources that we have meet the needs of the people that are coming through our doors? Not always. I know one of the pieces that is being discussed more tomorrow is the side of education and so forth. But it certainly is a barrier for a number of people coming in. Like I said earlier, we see a lot of immigrants and they're coming in with their education. They have to get it recognized here in Quebec. And part of it gets recognized, but not all of it. And then they have to go find other training. So, we're spending time helping to research that. Technically, it's not our mandate either to look at the education side of things. So, it's kind of a piece that for us has kind of created not an uncomfortable spot, but it's certainly a spot where our clients are asking us, where can I go to get this kind of training? Because I need it in English. I don't know enough in French. The opportunities in French here are vast. We are in Quebec, so there's quite a few resources when it comes to that. But when it comes to specific training for a lot of English speakers. Sometimes the training is there, but it's not exactly what they need. So an example of that would be an employment counselor. If you're an employment counselor here and you go through the French system, you get a very specific certificate diploma at the end of it, where you're specifically trained to do the job that we do. In the English side of things, it's a very different training that's being offered, and it's just a small component to a bigger picture. So you see that there's some inconsistencies with the education system in English and the education system in French. And, you know, sometimes you're just trying to find the resources yourself and make those connections as well. You know, we are pretty lucky because Service Quebec is right next door to us. So I know they try and deal with a lot of the education issues as well. So sometimes we use them as one of our resources to kind of say, you know, it's not a client of yours, it's a client that we've recruited. You know, do you have suggestions maybe to help with that as well, to kind of bridge that piece?
Thanks, Trina. Cassandra, Alan, anything you want to add in terms of reaching your clientele and making sure they know about your organizations and services?
Well, I think Trina mentioned it before. I think, you know, letting people know just that communication and outreach aspect, it costs money, it takes resources. And I think, you know, we recently brought on an outreach and communications person earlier this year, but we were operating without one for quite a while. And so, yeah, people don't know what's out there. People are alone, struggling. They don't know that these services and resources exist. And I think it takes work and it takes resources. And I think oftentimes, you know, when we look at where we have to manage our budget, those are the things that kind of get pushed to the side. But it's so important, like, and sometimes you really have to go and get, you know, specifically with our community, the community that we're working with at DESTA, sometimes you really have to go out and get them. So it takes a more personalized approach. It takes, you know, it takes a lot of effort and work. So I think that piece is definitely key.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that last point, Cassandra, is so important. It's the same. We find ourselves having to knock on doors. I think, you know, the days of we throwing something up on Facebook and assuming that 100% of the people know about it now, it's they're gone. And so, yeah, we've just found ourselves having to do so many different things to try to get that awareness built. So even piggybacking on some of our other programs or activities. So seniors wellness groups, well, we'll have a portion of that dedicated to sharing information. You know, our youth activities, we make sure that along the way, we're also talking about, you know, our partners at the Anchor Training Center, or, you know, other opportunities for those young people. And I think there's also an opportunity for our partners, because Service Quebec came up a while ago, and you know, we built a really cool relationship with our Service Quebec centers here, and they're very frank. You know, that in order for them to get information out there, it's incredibly heavy. It's like it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. You know, you got to get things okayed, and they got to be approved up and down lines, and they, you know, they have to follow certain guidelines. And then if you add English on top of that, well, then people start losing their minds. Whereas the directors say to us, you know, we're under all of these restrictions, but you guys aren't. You guys can talk about us. And so we're like, yeah, heck yeah, we can do that. And so we don't have to follow all the rules, and I can approve the message. And, you know, so it helps. It's easier for me, but it helps them to be able to get that message out there. And they appreciate so much that support. But it takes effort, it takes time, and it takes resources to do that. And so, you know, how can we support that long term if there isn't a project that we can apply to be the spokespeople for employability of, you know, other employability organizations? So it's a critical piece. It's a barrier that we continue to work on. Cassandra, I just interviewed for a communications person yesterday. So yeah, definitely been missing. Definitely, you know, it's corner of the desk stuff that people have been trying to do, but nobody has been focused on. And I think that it's key. It's key for us.
Great, thank you. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. So in that same survey from 2021, we also surveyed English speakers themselves. So these are English speakers who were in the labor market. And another finding was that 31% of English speakers in that survey indicated that linguistic discrimination or employer bias based on language had contributed to their employment difficulties. So this is their self-perception of how they thought the job hunting process has gone. So in thinking about how sociocultural factors impact employment, how can this be addressed? And do you have any comments around that experience of people maybe feeling like, you know, their level of French wasn't perceived as being good enough?
I'll say 100%. And it's kind of funny to say it this way, but it kind of goes both ways. I have French-speaking clients that don't feel like their English is strong enough, but the majority of our clients are English-speaking, and they're definitely not comfortable speaking French. The linguistic barrier is a huge barrier, and it's not something that's going to go away, you know, overnight. It's going to take some time. It's going to take, I think, promotion. It's going to take a lot of understanding. It's going to take a lot of, you know, give and take, going back and forth. You know, we see clients that, you know, will interview for positions in English, and then they go for their training, and the very first day in training, everything's in French. You know, and then they're looking, going, well, I don't understand a word of the training, so I don't know what to do. So a lot of times they'll just leave that job and try and find something else because they're just not able to continue to do that. So, you know, it kind of perplexes me in one sense, after doing, you know, a whole interview and knowing that they're just specifically in English, but just, you know, sometimes being able to pull out those pieces where, you know, the French is strong enough. Like I said, it's something I think that's going to be there for a while, and it's something I think we'll need to tackle, not just individually, not as one organization, but as a group as a whole, and finding ways to maybe make those connections with the employers and with between our clients, and kind of being that person in the middle to try and help gap the distance between all of that. But it's going to take time, you know, and certainly solutions that are maybe outside of the box.
Yeah.
Alan or Cassandra?
Yeah, I think, Trina, you mentioned compassion and understanding. I think that's something that, you know, we live in a very unforgiving society, and sometimes, you know, just not understanding that even if someone is making the effort to build their language skills, particularly as an adult, it's very difficult to build the confidence that comes with that. So, you know, myself having gone to school completely in English, I can express myself in French, but I'm not going to express myself as well. And I'm very conscious of that. So I think, you know, there's not this this space for developing and giving, and, you know, it's okay, we understand. And, you know, just having that that type of positive reinforcement, that can go a long way in terms of just, you know, because people will very quickly develop an aversion psychologically to something if they feel they're consistently made to feel inadequate regarding it. So I think that's a huge space where employers can work towards, and just society as a whole, just, you know, understanding that, you know, we come from different cultures, we speak different languages, we're diverse, and making the space for that and valuing that, and really also rewarding the efforts of people who are really trying to, you know, it's not easy to immigrate here. It's not easy to come to a city where, you know, you don't speak the primary language. Those things are not easy, and we don't seem to have compassion for those things. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I guess I could just finish. I wasn't surprised when I saw the quote from the study, and I think as both of my panelist colleagues here have said, you know, I think part of it is the employer's issue, and part of it is the job seeker's issue. So I'm an English speaker. My wife is French speaking. 90% of our arguments are because of misunderstanding. I'm fluent in French, I thought, and she speaks excellent English, but sometimes there's just little nuances that are missed. And so I could totally see two strangers who are trying to have a job interview where the employer doesn't speak any English, and the applicant might struggle in French, could probably have different perceptions of how that meeting went. It's just interesting, and this whole idea of confidence, I think, is so huge. As CASA, we have 21 employees here. Some of my employees are unilingual English. They've come home, or they just haven't been able to develop their French skills. And when we start to talk about it, you know, I find out that they have some French. They just don't think it's very good, and so they rarely use it. And myself, you know, living in the Gaspé and living mostly in French every day, I've kind of gotten over the fact that I'm, you know, never going to be perfect. I know this. My French is never going to be perfect. In fact, I think I speak a very good French. And then yesterday I did a radio interview, and when I listened to it, I went, "Oh my gosh, why doesn't anybody tell me I make all these mistakes?" And my wife says I'd be constantly correcting you if I did that. So, anyways, all that to say is I think that the safe space for people to be able to grow. That's one thing I think that CASA provides, and I think other organizations definitely could probably learn from that example in terms of offering a place where people can get better and feel safe enough that they don't feel like they're going to be judged or you know, ostracized because of a lack of ability in French. So.
Can I just say, I love your examples, Alan. I hope you saw the emojis going up the side. I think that's fantastic, because I think, you know, I mentioned it before, it's that stress of making a mistake. Well, we're human beings and we make mistakes. You know, I still make mistakes in English sometimes, and that's my mother tongue. So, you know, I think it's just something, the compassion and all that need to be there. And but I really love your example that just hit home. That was perfect.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's relatable, right? Just seeing all the reactions that yeah, we all need comfort and safety, right? And the work that we do at PERT is a lot about, you know, talking about how important work is, right? People spend roughly a third of their lives in the workplace, right? So it has to be a space where people feel like they're welcome, right? And it's okay if, you know, you're not meeting these very high expectations that are probably, you're setting higher expectations than other people are setting for you. So thank you for sharing that. So just speaking, my last question here is just around that idea of safety, right? So we spoke about the important role of employers, right? And how employers themselves also need to be, you know, compassionate towards the people that they're looking to hire, and understanding that, you know, this person might not have perfect French, right? And they need to work on it, but they can still do this job. But I'd want to hear from you, from your work, working directly with employers. What are some of the barriers that employers themselves are facing, right? And what are some of the issues that you think you could tackle directly by working with employers? If anyone wants to start us off, I'll ask you.
I can start off. I don't mind. I think really Alan's example, I go back to that again, is it just hits everything right on the nose. It's the fact that if you're an English-speaking person and you're trying to communicate in French, what you're thinking in English isn't coming out exactly how it's coming out in French isn't the same thing. So I think just being able to understand what you're thinking and what you're speaking may be two different things. So sometimes it's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding that happens between employers and employees, and even colleagues between French and English. You know, myself, I'm very English. We have another organization that we partnered with in La Naudière, which is very, very French. And, you know, there I speak all French. Well, I make my mistakes. they start laughing. So I know I've made a mistake. So, but we have a good laugh over it. And then they turn around and they try to speak English because they're trying to work on their English, which to me is just the perfect example of the compassion. So they're trying to promote their English as well, because they know there's more and more people coming from Montreal, coming up into La Naudière, that are English speaking. So being able to communicate back and forth, but just having that opportunity and that comfort. I think that if you do make a mistake, somebody's there to say, by the way, you need to say it this way, you need to say it that way. But I think it's some work that we need to do if you're not in a situation where the environment is as accepting to some of the problems and some of the things. And like I said, it just really goes back into what we think in English and what we're saying in French are probably two very different things. So I don't think it's that you're making a mistake. It's just what you're actually thinking isn't coming out the way it should say, that the way you want it to be. So, just having some understanding that, maybe it's on both sides of the fence, I think would be a big step.
If I could maybe talk about just refer back to the keynote this morning, that notion of that check-in or the commonized, I know there are language tools out there. We did a project a long time ago in Quebec City where we looked at these things, but it'd be really cool if employers were able to assess the level of French that they actually need for their job, and were able to communicate that to the job seeker in a way that they would understand. So that bilingual, this catch-all word that means different things to different people. My next door neighbor thinks he's bilingual and he can barely order supper in English, and I'm almost fluent, but I don't consider myself bilingual some days. So it's weird that we have all of these varying understandings. If there was I love that idea that we could use a common tool, and the employer could say, I'm only looking for this, and then the job seeker could go, well, this is what I got, and then they're like, hey, this is awesome, rather than trying to both develop an understanding of what this level of French requirement is. I don't know, it's just an idea, but it seems like it would be a really cool tool for the employers, but it'd be very empowering for people who are thinking of applying as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that quickly. I think the biggest challenge for employers now is really just, it takes a lot more for employers to be able to retain employees. I think we have, young adults coming up nowadays that are much less, I want to say loyal. Like there's not this, I'm going to, stay for 5 to 10 years in one company and build my career there. So it takes a lot more from the employer side to be able to just attract and retain these employees. And I think it goes beyond just competitive salary and benefits. It's really meeting the employees where they're at and working to develop them and, giving them a space where they feel like they're valued. I think that's a big challenge for employers nowadays.
Absolutely. There's some fun comments coming through the chat here. Dana said, thank you so much for discussing the emotional aspect of integrating into a new culture and language. And Susanna says, totally agree, Alan. Our self-assessment of our level of bilingualism is often inaccurate, which is so true, right? And around that issue of confidence. So something that can externally just put the pressure off of employers to just know that, okay, this person can do this job just fine, right? And they'll figure it out and they'll be speaking French in no time. I think that could definitely also ease that process. So we're coming near the end of our conversation here. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to open up the Q&A. So just a reminder, you can submit a question to our panelists in the Q&A box, and I will read these out. And whoever wants to answer between Trina, Alan, and Cassandra, please just go for it. So the first question here is from Miranda, who says, hi, I have noticed that more older women 60 and over, English and French, are looking for work. So have you seen this in your organizations? Like, what is the status of, mature workers? We know for a fact that, the retirement age is changing, and, with the pandemic and the current economic situation, or just, people want to keep working past the age of 60. What have you seen, or do you have any comments around that?
I know myself, as employment counselor, I have a number of not just female, but also male clients that are age 60 and over. The reality is, I think for a lot of our aging population is that they can't live off of just a pension alone. With the cost of living going up, with everything seems to be going up and up and up, but a lot of things aren't increasing with regards to that. So I have a number of clients, and we're recently seeing quite a few clients coming in that are looking for either part-time or, 25, 30 hours, maybe not full-time all the time, trying to find something to be able to just make ends meet. I have a client right now, she was with an organization for 25, 27 years now, that she was there. And during the pandemic, the owner of the actual company decided to close his doors. He was over 75 and still working. So, for her, she's never had to look for a job in her life. The job was presented to her at the time. She's never done a job search in her life. So I think we're seeing more and more youth, and we're also seeing more and more, 60 and over, trying to be able to augment their pensions just to be able to make ends meet. And, I have probably in my caseload now, I can relate to 7 or 8 of them very easily, being age 60 and over in that position, trying to find something just to make ends meet. It's definitely, a problem that we're seeing more and more. So thank you, Miranda, and I say hi. I used to work with Miranda, so.
Oh, great. Next question is from Andre. So he says, also, as is also the case with other issues regarding open-mindedness, employers also need support with onboarding new employees who are English speakers in a French-speaking environment. So can either of you speak to that issue of onboarding and how important that is to just ensure that, people don't self-select themselves out of a new job?
I think maybe I could relate it to our experience with the tourism sector. Part of that whole process of us building the awareness of the opportunity associated with having English speakers in their businesses was also dispelling the myths of some of the challenges that they saw with hiring an English speaker. And so part of that process was to help them to develop the tools and develop the approach that they're going to be able to intake an English speaker, and to help them learn the job, but also be able to improve their French at the same time. So yeah, I agree. There's a learning curve there, and I'm not sure that all businesses, all business owners are equipped, or they have that knowledge right now. But it's definitely a support that's required, and we've seen it in the tourism industry, and I just assume it's probably in a lot more sectors.
Thank you. We have a question here from Zoe, who asked, how about literacy issues? So literacy is, a topic that we don't focus on at PERT, but there are several organizations here in Quebec that focus on that topic. So have any of your organizations, dealt with some of those issues with your clients?
I can speak to that. I think, literacy is in the broad sense, like when we're talking about financial literacy, even, technological literacy, like people feeling comfortable with using a lot of these tools and just, managing their own finances, their own budget. We've definitely worked from that perspective with older people, but also, more so with young people, because when you start them on the right track for some of these things, it makes a huge difference for them and their families. So we have definitely touched on some of these issues, and I think they're important.
Great, thank you for sharing that. We have another question here where someone's asking about what workplace industry have you seen the most success for English speakers? So I think this person's asking more about where do English speakers tend to go? We know from our research at PERT that the majority of English speakers actually end up working in like retail and tourism. And one of the challenges that we've seen is that often English speakers end up working in the services, but then might face like less access to other types of careers if they want to bridge over to something that might have, you know, maybe a more complex requirement for their French language skills. So I don't know if anyone wants to just speak to that issue of, you know, industries and maybe silos that English speakers end up in.
I could give the Gaspésian perspective. The obvious one that I mentioned earlier, but traditionally English speakers have been overrepresented in the primary sectors of forestry, fishing, and agriculture. As inflation has hit us and costs are rising and the salaries have stayed the same, jobs in the service industry, so restaurants, coffee shops, those type of things are becoming less appealing to the people who normally would have worked there. And now, ironically, they're becoming opportunities for English speakers who are working in the primary sector. So we see more and more English speakers at Tim Hortons, for instance, or entrepreneurs or IGAs, which on its face, you kind of go, wow, this is cool. We haven't seen this before. And now all of a sudden there's like the Tim Hortons and Passaic is something like 80% English speakers now. But then when you take that step back and go, well, is this job really going to help them to make ends meet? And what is their perspectives for the future? There are some questions to be asked. So yeah, I think I agree with the PERT study. I think that we do see a lot of in retail, in tourism in the Gaspé, and a lot of those people have come from primary sectors. So they're happy to be out of the fields and off the boats, but now they're working a high-stress job trying to serve double to a guy like me. So.
Great. We have a question from Frank. So Frank asks, what are the specific challenges you see in matching bilingual candidates to employers who need qualified bilingual workers? How are the relationships with employers developed with French-owned or French-led organizations to ensure that bilingual candidates can be matched to those job openings? So I think the assumption there is that these are English speakers who, let's say, have a high proficiency of French, right? And they just need to get through the door, perhaps.
So I'll try and relate to what I see coming from my perspective. You know, we do have a number of clients that are bilingual. But I think, like it was said before, sometimes they don't feel like their French is as strong as what is being required for the actual position. And a lot of that comes back to the written reports and things like that. Sometimes they're able to verbally, you know, express things verbally, but when it comes to writing French, it's you know, it's much more challenging. You know, you've got the masculine, feminine, you've got a lot of things there. So sometimes I think it really is trying to find out exactly what the employer is looking for when it comes to the side of being bilingual and needing that French piece. Is it just for, you know, communicating back and forth orally, or is it the written piece? Or, you know, so I think it really is to have to kind of dig into what the employer really needs themselves, and then trying to find out, okay, well, my client has this, and this. You know, I feel like I'm a perfect example for that. I do the reports for Point Claire with regards to, you know, the rapport trimestriel, the year-end reports and things like that, and they're all in French, but I know my French isn't at the level that it needs to be when it comes to writing. So I have created support within my organization to help me out with the writing piece. So sometimes it really is just that piece of, is there somebody that can actually help with the actual written piece, or just with refining the written piece once it's done, just to be able to kind of maybe bridge that little piece that might be of difficulty for the actual client itself, or vice versa. So I also have other employers that have a client right now, and actually the fact that she is English speaking for them, because we are in the West Island, we have a very strong English speaking community. That's actually the bonus for her, because her written English is very strong. So we are starting to see some change within our community, but I know maybe in Alan's community, it might be completely different. It being very French in Gaspésie, sometimes it can be, you know, just those little pieces that can cause either the client or can cause the employer maybe to not think that they're actually capable of doing that. So.
Could I just raise, I know that we're running up on time, but I just wanted to raise, this is something that's been a challenge for us. And I think we're trying hard to work with employers like the CIS and like a lot of other government institutions. So at the same time here in the Gaspé, we have a lot of trouble recruiting bilingual, so English speaking professionals, social workers, etc. We have people in the community that have their degrees, that are qualified and have job experience, but they can't pass the French exam that they need to get the order to get into the job. And so is there a way that you know, we're trying to work with the CIS and other those types of employers to say, look, these people are predominantly needed to serve the English speaking community, and we know they can do that because they speak English. So is there a way that we can figure out this requirement for the language test, maybe in a temporary way, there get some you know, training ongoing so that eventually they can pass it, but just to fill the need for these workers, but also help to fill the need for the community that aren't getting the services that they need. So I'm pretty sure there's some people on this on the line here from the province of Quebec. So talking to you, Mr. Flock.
Thanks for the shout out, Alan. And actually, that's a great segue and a little teaser for tomorrow. So tomorrow there will be a panel discussing professional orders and some of the issues around, you know, English speakers and linguistic minorities being able to pass the OQLF exam or prove their French language proficiency in order to be qualified to practice in Quebec. So you definitely do not want to miss that. But
Just
given
say
the
one
time,
thing quick. I don't know if you guys saw in the chat, I think it was Jacqueline. I'm not sure who wrote the comment, but made a comment that McGill actually has a program that will help prepare. So just wanted to kind of make a shout out for that, because I just saw it pop up, and while Alan was talking, I thought, okay, well, there's a good link right there. So.
And I didn't know that, so I'm glad I participated in this panel.
Hi, Jacqueline. Jacqueline is one of the people that works at Dialogue McGill, which is a fantastic program. And yes, they will be offering free OQLF French exam preparation workshops in the future. So if you have trained as a nurse, I don't know, something else, another professional order, check out Dialogue McGill and see how you can pass your exam. So this does bring our panel to a close. I want to thank you, Trina, Cassandra, Alan, for being our panelists today. This has been such an interesting and very insightful conversation. I think you all do amazing work helping English-speaking communities, and we thank you for all the work that you're doing on the ground. This is also the conclusion of our first day of our conference. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. I hope you'll be back tomorrow. Today, just for a recap, it started off with this insightful presentation by Donna Lewis from the National Centre for Learning Welsh. We did record it, so we'll be following up with everyone to see if we can maybe share some snippets from that conversation, but she shared some really exciting insights into what they're doing with learning Welsh in Wales and some of the things that we could port over to learning French in Quebec. And then we also had our wonderful panelists today, and there's so many things that I learned in this panel, but I think one of the things that stood out to me is just the importance of supporting, these organizations that are doing this work, the importance of funding, adequate resources, but also wraparound supports to ensure that, it's not just about employment, it's also about language, it's about all the other challenges that people are facing, and just addressing those issues holistically. So thank you to our panelists for sharing that. And tomorrow will be day 2, our last day. And just as a little teaser, we have 3 events. So we'll be starting off at 9:30 a.m. With our first panel, which will be on French language learning for the workplace. So we'll be talking about how to integrate French language learning directly into on-the-job learning. We'll also be having a panel after that on Quebec's professional orders, which should be quite interesting. And then lastly, we'll have a panel on the education system and those relationships between education and employment for English speakers. So yes, we hope to see you tomorrow, and have a good day, everyone, and thanks for joining us.